the Iowa Prairie Network's winter meeting virtual this year. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our fundraiser that we have going on right now. So every year we have a fundraiser for a prairie restoration project. We are doing ours this year virtually through PayPal, or you can send a check to our treasurer's address. You can find that on the Iowa Prairie Network website. So the prairie that we're going to be trying to help this year is Vincent Bluff, and it is a prairie remnant in Council Bluffs, Iowa. So all the way down here on the southwest corner of Iowa. It is a very high diversity remnant. It's cozied up right next to the rest of the city of Council Bluffs, and it was spared the plow because of the steepness of the Les Hills, which we all are, aware. That's where we find a lot of our prairies. It was spared human encroachment with housing because there wasn't a good way to get roads in. So the Les Hills Preservation Society helped to buy it, and with the help of the City of Council Bluffs, it's now a state preserve. But the management is not done by the city, and it's just currently done by volunteers. So as you can imagine, a prairie that is surrounded by city gets a huge influx of invasive plant species, particularly for this prairie, oriental bittersweet, autumn olive, you name it. There's all kinds of awful woody plants, especially, that are taking over. So the money that's raised for this project will go towards kind of fighting back those invasive plant species. So any help is appreciated. And again, you can do that through our PayPal on the website, or you can send a check to our treasurer, whose address is on the website. And if you want to know more information about the Vincent Bluff Restoration Project, we have a page specifically on our Iowa Prairie Network website for that. Currently, we have raised over $400. So yay! Thank you so much, everyone. It's wonderful how quickly people are jumping on and helping, and it's very, very appreciated. We all love prairie, and we all know it takes a lot of time and effort and money to keep them healthy. So at the very end of this meeting, we will leave this Zoom meeting on for everyone to have a chance to chat with each other if you'd like, or to say hi, or say it's not going to be organized. It's just going to be available for people to talk to each other. And then a big surprise and super exciting thing that we're having happening this year is we are doing the Iowa Prairie Conference. It will be a 2-day event, July 31st to August 1st. The specifics are still in the works. The planning committees are still working on them, but we will have a virtual conference similar to this with speakers. And then we will have in-person prairie field trips all throughout Iowa. So super exciting. We're all really, chomping at the bit to get back out into the prairie with each other. We will be doing social distancing as well, trying to be safe, but they will be in person, and we're all super excited about it. So without further ado, I'm going to send it back to Sarah so we can get started.
All right, thanks, Michelle. So kicking off today's meeting, we have Adrienne Gennett, who is the Associate Curator of Collections and Education with University Museums at Iowa State University. Adrienne curates multiple expeditions at the Brunier, hopefully I'm saying that right, Art Museum throughout the academic year, along with creating unique curriculum interactions using the museum's permanent collection across the various colleges and departments. She passionately believes that art can enhance the education and lives of everyone, and enthusiastically shares her love for art. Shares her love of art for all. So with that, Adrienne has some exciting news that she is going to share with us. So go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me a chance to promote this new exhibition. Thank you to Thomas Rosburg, who allowed me to have this 10 minutes. We're in a situation where, COVID is limiting our participants and our visitors. So it's a really good time to promote this anywhere and everywhere possible. The Brunier is 10,000 square feet. So once I talk about this exhibition, if you feel comfortable, you are more than welcome to come in. It's pretty easy to stay far away from others. But I completely understand. And we also have a lot of virtual programming that will happen. So this exhibition is really unique and interesting for us, but also I think something you all will like. So I'm gonna share my screen real quick and pop this guy up. So I just have a couple slides about it. So the exhibition is titled Compelling Ground, Landscapes, Environments, and Peoples of Iowa. And it opened just last week and will be open until July 23rd. And this exhibition is actually about 25 years in the making, but about 3 years of my time. It is both the anniversary and celebration of this original exhibition that some of you might have heard of, that was called Land of the Fragile Giants, Landscapes, Environments, and Peoples of the Less Hills. So that exhibition about 25 plus years ago, when it started being worked on, and the inception of that exhibition was our director, Lynette Pullman, who some of you may know, who grew up in the Less Hills with her family, talking about, why don't we talk about the landscape here? Why don't we talk about the prairie and the beauty that we find here in this region that we love and that we're from? And so kind of a grassroots effort to create this amazing exhibition, starting in Moorhead, Iowa, which is where she is from. And then it moved all around the state. And so artists were invited to come to the Less Hills and use the landscape and the prairie and the agricultural scenery as their inspiration to create arts. And along with that, a really wonderful publication was done. And the publication brought together both academics and scientists, along with people who studied the humanities. And so had these paired essays that had a lot of personal reflection and really wonderful comments on the Less Hills and why they are so important to Iowa, and the entire state of Iowa and the whole country. And so in the exhibition, we do have a selection. You can kind of see in that first picture with the compelling ground, there's a Gary Bowling painting back there that's from the original exhibition. So we do have a selection from the original exhibition within this one. And it's really nice to have them together because they're usually all around campus and they haven't been together in quite a while. And so you really can feel how these artists were inspired by the Less Hills, and you can see that they're looking at very similar things, that they're in the same spots sometimes in what they're creating, but in totally different ways. And then this exhibition, 25 years later, I wanted to honor that idea of using the landscape as inspiration, but I wanted to move to the entirety of the state. Because of course, once they did this about the Less Hills, everyone from everywhere else in Iowa said, hey, what about Eastern Iowa? What about Northwestern Iowa? And so there was this moment to really kind of consider, what about the rest of the state and the rest of the landscapes around the state? And so I also wanted to really incorporate the idea of change. 25 years seems so long, but it's so short. It's such a time period. It's been quite a while, but so much has changed in this and gone forward, for both the good and the bad. And so I wanted to have a conversation through the exhibition and the artists, but also through the publication. So we have a similar publication that I invited different scientists, including Tom Rosburg, thank you very much, and academics, and some writers and other essayists, and also farmers, to write about what they see in the landscape they're within in Iowa, its importance to them, the prairie, the agricultural farming, everything that is all the differences within the state, but also what has changed in 25 years, and also what the future may bring. And so there's a little bit there's a lot of kind of looking forward to what may happen in the next 25 years. But the art in the exhibition is really diverse, and I tried to have different media throughout the exhibition. I wanted to really not just have paintings on walls, but there's ceramics, there's metalworking, there's installations, there a beautiful paper mache prairie by Mary Merkelhess. So there's a little bit of everything. So I'll just show a couple images. That first one is a series of 4 by the artist Ellen Wagner. It's all pastel. Each one is a little bit different, and talking about the different, when you're farming, how you use different kinds of crops and things like that. And she is originally from DeWitt, that region of Iowa. So the next one here, you see a couple more. So we have at the top a beautiful oil painting by Fred Easker, and he actually has the GPS coordinates for each of his paintings. So if you're interested, you can come and figure out exactly where he was standing and looking in Iowa. I believe he's more in the northeastern corner of Iowa. And just, kind of typical beautiful Iowa scene. At the bottom, we have two photographs. They're actually they're photographs and digital scans together. And so you see the prairie fire. This artist, Christine Carr, kind of tracked prairie fires when she could find them, and she's a photographer and would take images. And then the bottom, she's scanned prairie grasses or dirt. She has another one that has water and things like that in it. And so it's the top is the photograph, and then the bottom is the scanned image that she's then manipulated and brought together in this really beautiful way. Then you have a ceramic structure right there called the Cooperative. And Brian Roberts works at Central College in Pella, and he also has an agricultural background, is from a farming family and owns his own land. And he teaches all forms of art, but ceramics is what he creates. And so he makes these amazing, we have a little corn crib. He loves these structures that are both, almost non-existent, or dilapidated or disused in a lot of places, but had dot the Iowa landscape. And to him, that's what he sees when he thinks about the Iowa landscape, these amazing structures that he finds a lot of beauty in. And then John Preston with a watercolor spraying what? He lives outside Fairfield, Iowa. And he was actually in the original exhibition 25 years ago with beautiful landscapes, but his scenery has changed so much. He wanted to make a bit of a comment on, the different confined animal operations that have, there were always some, but now there's more. Also, the larger conglomerate farming versus the small scale farming that was done before. And so he's got 4 watercolors that talk about that, which was it was a departure for him and what he created, but how he's trying to continue to find inspiration from the changing land around him. And then there's just a couple more installations. You see an adaptive reuse of a grain bin by an architect on campus at Iowa State and an artist. And then you see that beautiful Mary Merkel Hess I was telling you about. It's all paper mache. And it makes you feel as if you're kind of laying in the grass in the prairie, the way she's kind of created and manipulated this paper. She hand paints the entire thing. And so there's variations of colors in it too. And so as you can see, there's quite a bit of different types of art in the exhibition. It's the main space of the entirety of the Brunier Art Museum. And so it's got quite a bit of space and room to walk around and enjoy. But last but not least, I want to talk about the publication really quickly. We have this wonderful publication where I invited several authors to write about, as I said, the landscape, the changing landscape, farming in Iowa, sustainability, climate change, all these different ideas. So we've got Lance Foster, who's talking about the Native American presence in Iowa and the continued work and what they're doing to continue with food sovereignty and things like that. Hannah Bates and Richard Cruz talking about soil and water. Amber Anderson and Lee Burris also talking about soil. Tom Rosburg talks about the ecology. Eugene Tackle and Bill Kutowski talk about climate change. Connie Mutel actually talks about both the climate change and her own personal reflections, as she was the original editor with Mary Swander. So there's also an essay on their reflections. Angie Carter just talks about her experience within the ecology. She actually works in Michigan, but she's from Ames. And Patty Naylor is a farmer and working the land herself, and talks about her experience of being on the land of the small farm. And Mary Swander, of course, a beautiful writer, the former poet laureate of the state, and the original co-editor of the original exhibition publication, has a beautiful essay about her life in Iowa. And so it's a great publication that has these wonderful essays along with reflections from the original exhibition. Lynette Pullman writes a long essay about how she is all the work that she did for that original exhibition. That's really wonderful to get kind of a timeline, because I've heard so much about it, but for her to write it all down, it's amazing how much happened from that exhibition, and it ended up traveling the world. So if you're interested, the exhibition is open. The publication is $30. If you're interested in not coming, but purchasing the publication, you can always purchase it. We do put on $5.50 for shipping, so just be aware of that. Otherwise, we are open Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we're right on Iowa State's campus, right by Hilton Coliseum. It's actually quite easy to get to. You don't have to go onto campus directly onto, which is nice. Oops, I'll stop the share. You don't have to see students if you don't want to. They're not all flocking to the Schumann building, but if you're interested, we'll be open till July 23rd. So we have quite a bit of time, and we would love to have more visitors that really understand what they're seeing in the arts and connect with it because of their passions for the prairie and the landscape of Iowa. And thank you again for this opportunity to give it a quick plug. I really appreciate it.
So next up, we have Dr. Tom Rosburg, who's very familiar with this crowd, but for those of you that might not know Tom as well, he has been on the faculty in the biology department at Drake University for 24 years, where he teaches classes in botany, ecology, research and statistics, and Iowa natural history. His research expertise in plant ecology has garnered over $1.5 million in grants, over 105 different projects. He has contributed his expertise to 4 books and has produced over 300 scientific papers, reports, articles, and presentations, many with Drake undergrads as co-authors. Dr. Rosburg receives many requests to give presentations and lead field trips for community groups or clubs, and has made over 330 such presentations on a wide range of nature topics. And this year alone, he's been doing presentations like crazy, virtually. He has published over 540 photographs in books, magazines, calendars, and reports. So thank you, Tom. And now we will learn more about Liatris.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And I should say, Sarah is one of my top students at Drake. So great that she's stayed in Iowa. I'm happy to see her applying all of her excitement and passion to our prairies here. And just second on Adrienne's presentation, I was just there at the Brunner yesterday, and I think there were maybe a total of 3 people in there. So totally, at least yesterday, totally safe as far as social distancing goes. And 3 words come to mind: beautiful, amazing, and diverse. It is an exhibit that you definitely should take an opportunity to see. It's going to be there, as you said, till July. So plenty of opportunity in the next several months to stop in there and check that out. All right, I will share my screen, I guess, here and pull up this presentation. So I think Sarah, if she hasn't yet, she may be sending this to you. That's the plan anyway. I'm just getting a pointer here for myself. Okay, so, well, I imagine all of us, I bet almost everybody here at the meeting can identify a blazing star. They are probably, we might say, a quintessential species of the prairie. All of Iowa's 7 or 8 species, a little bit of controversy there we'll get to, but 7 or 8 species are fairly indicative of a prairie, and in fact, pretty indicative of high quality prairie. So it's a striking plant, easy to recognize, at least to the genus level. The etymology of Liatris is not known, so I can't tell you where that name comes from. But common name, of course, blazing star, I think, in my mind, sort of refers to the torch-like resemblance that you kind of get when you see a prairie of prairie blazing star in bloom, for example. The other term, the other common name, gay feather, probably refers to the flower heads when they're mature and are dispersing seeds and are more dried out. They kind of have a feathery looking flower head. So we're going to learn something about Liatris today. So if you look at the genus as a whole, the biogeography of North American, Liatris is a New World genus. It's only occurs in North America, Mexico, and the West Indies. There are 37 species right now that are recognized by the Flora of North America. The genus as a whole is found in 41 states and 5 provinces. Here on this map, you can see the number of species represented and reported for each state. And you can see that there's a trend as you go further to the south and somewhat to the southeast, the diversity goes up. The species that we have in Iowa, the 8 species that we have in Iowa are among the most widespread species. So Liatris aspera, for example, rough blazing star, that's found in 26 states. Liatris squarosa, scaling blazing star, is found in 23. Pycnostakia is found in 22. The red numbers there show the number of state endemic species. So there are a few of those, and again, those are mainly found down in the south. Florida has 5, Texas has 3, Alabama and Arkansas each have 1. So we're going to take a look at the morphology of blazing star first, and we'll start at the bottom. So you've got these very distinctive perinating organs and roots. It's been a little bit confusing how botanists have decided to characterize these, but the overall, I guess, consensus is to describe these as corms. A corm is a modified stem, but it occurs below ground. So it's a very fleshy, swollen stem base. It can be mostly spherical, as you can kind of see in this picture here. In dotted blazing star, the corms actually get more elongated and will actually go a little bit more horizontally and start to resemble a rhizome more than a corm. These are, again, what the plant grows back from each spring. Because both a corm and a rhizome are stems, they're modified stems, of course, but because they're stems, they have buds that are located in their tissues, and those buds can produce new growth, can produce new shoots. So the stems that come from the corms and the rhizomes, again, are for the most part always erect and simple. That means there's not much branching involved. On some species, there can be a little bit of branching towards the base, but for the most part, there's not. A lot of variation among all the species. And again, speaking mainly for the species in Iowa, those stems can be pubescent, which means hairy, to glabrous, means not hairy at all. And there will often be multiple ramets. So a ramet is an individual stem from a single plant. So when we think about plants in particular, it's important to characterize what you're looking at. And when you talk about a gennett versus a ramet, those are the two terms we use to describe kind of the growth and what we're seeing. The term gennett refers to, basically, you can think of it as the genetic individual. So it is the individual. It's the amount of growth that arises from a single seed. Single seed, of course, is a baby plant. And so everything that comes from that seed is all the same individual. That's a gennett. But because of vegetative growth and because of corms and rhizomes and buds in them, you can get multiple stems coming from the same plant. And those are the ramets. So what we can see sometimes in at least some species, I think I've seen dotted blazing star, for example, 10 to 20 stems that are present on a single plant. Other species aren't quite so high. We look at the leaves. The leaves kind of characterized as you see here. They're always going to be simple leaves. They're alternate, although they're often so packed into the stem, or at least on some species, that they're hard to tell. They look like they might be whorled, but they're not. They're entire, which means that there's no teeth along the edge. Numerous and dense for sure, in most species at least. And the shape can vary a lot, but blazing stars pretty much have pretty narrow leaves, more or less. The whole genus does. And kind of depends upon the species and kind of depends upon what part of the stem you're looking at. The lower leaves are always larger and a little bit more of an elliptic shape or oblanceolate shape. And as you go up the stem, the leaves get smaller and more linear. And again, they can be pubescent to glabrous, depending upon the species as well. One of the characteristics we use to identify them is a number of main veins. And they can have either one main vein, as you can see right here in this leaf, or 3 to 5 main veins. Now, there's always going to be one central main vein, of course, the mid vein, but we can see a couple of lateral veins there on either side that are certainly significant, noticeable enough that we would call this one having 5 main veins. And quite a few of the species also have little glands, punctate little glands, little dots that you see in the leaves. You can see that on this leaf here as well. And it's just not punctata, which of course gets its name from that, but other species as well. Aspera, which is what this species is here, has those punctate, or those little dots, glandular dots too. All right, let's look at the inflorescence, the flowering. So now I'm going to have to assume, I guess, some of you know at least something about flowers and morphology a little bit here. So that little sketch there of a blazing star, and that's spicata right there, kind of gives you a sense of what the flowers would look like. The flowers are born in a primary inflorescence. That's what that term means. The inflorescence where the individual flowers are born. They're born in this primary inflorescence called a capitulum, or more simply called a head, which we're seeing right there. This is an example of a head inflorescence of the family Asteraceae, which of course is the family of the blazing stars they're in. Now, this is not the type of head that blazing stars have, but this is just a diagram to help you understand what we mean by a head. It's got this receptacle tissue here on which many, usually many, and it can be dozens of small, tiny flowers, we call florets, are attached. And in the Asteraceae, there are possibility of 4 different kinds of florets. Now, the one that we have to be concerned about for blazing stars is a disc floret. And the disc floret is usually, almost in all cases, a perfect flower, meaning it's got both male and female sexes in it. But there are some species that have disc florets that are male only. You can see the other types of flowers here, the ray floret, ligulate floret, filiform floret. Again, we won't worry about those too much. I just want you to know that it is more complicated than just one kind of flower. There are four different kinds of flowers. But in the blazing stars, again, there's just one type of flower, the disc floret. And that means then that we can call those heads, more specifically, we can call those discoid heads, because they only have disc flowers. Now, another important part of the Asteraceae head inflorescence is the fact that it's got this involucre and filaries. The involucre is the group of filaries. In this cross section, we're seeing a filary here and a filary over here, but there in actuality, there's lots of them that surround the entire receptacle, sort of subtend it or sit at the base of it, and the entire mass of all of those filaries, or another term, involucre bract, is the involucre. Those become very important in identifying species of blazing star. The type of disc floret is not going to be very important. It's going to be more the types of filaries. So again, those disc florets are perfect, as I said. And a lot of this is somewhat true again for the entire family in all of the Asteraceae. And again, shown here on these disc flowers, the calyx, which again, as you would associate, with a sort of typical flower as those green little scale-like or little leaf-like structures that sit right below the petals. In the Asteraceae, that calyx is modified to form a structure we call the pappus. And that pappus can be lots of different forms or versions of that, but in the blazing stars, they're going to be of the form of what we call capillary bristles, which simply just means slender bristles. And you can see examples of those right here in this diagram. The corolla, which is, of course, the term for the petals, all of the petals, is sympetalous. That means that the corolla, those petals that make that corolla, are all fused, at least in part. They're fused all the way up into just towards the tip. Then they are no longer fused, and we have the corolla lobes. So in a fused corolla in the Asteraceae on these disc flowers, we'll have a tube, which is way down here at the bottom. Then there's a throat, that's this expanded part. And then the corolla lobes that are the unfused portions that are up here. And there's usually 4 or 5 lobes, but in blazing star, it's mostly 5. The stamens are epipetalous. That means that the stamens, the filaments, which are the lower portion of them, are attached to the inside of the corolla tube. You'd have to take this corolla tube here and pull it apart, as has been done here. Split that, pull it apart, look inside, and there, sure enough, we can see the filaments. They're attached right at the point where the corolla tube changes from the tube to the throat. So at the base of the throat. There's going to be 5 of these stamens. The filaments are not fused to each other, but they are attached again to the inside of the corolla here. And as we go up and see the anthers are connate, which means fused. The anthers themselves are fused to form this anther tube. The style, which comes from the top of the ovary, clear down here. Here's the ovary actually right here, and then this is showing a cutaway diagram of it. But the style comes from the top of the ovary, it comes up through the corolla tube, up into the throat, and it comes up and goes through the anther tube, and then comes out the anther tube and will bifurcate into 2 style branches. And there's the anther tube. We could talk more about the pollination that goes on here, but I don't have time for that. There's a picture of what the disc flowers of a blazing star would look like in real life. We can see the ovary down here. The pappus are all these white, slender bristles here. We can't see much of the lower portion of the corolla tube. We can't see the corolla tube here. We can maybe see a little bit of the corolla throat, and then we can see the lobes. Then we can see the style branches right here. Style branches are pretty much the same color as the petals. All right, so these head inflorescences, they are arranged in a secondary inflorescence. So again, when we're looking at this diagram here, each of these little dark blobs right here is a head. When we talk about what type of secondary inflorescence, we're interested in describing, well, how are those heads arranged? And the heads are in blazing stars are typically arranged in spikes or racemes. And what I mean by that is either the heads are sort of attached to the main stem just at their base without any kind of peduncle, or there is sort of a fluorescence stem, as you might call it, a head stem, a capitulum stem, a peduncle that has some distance to it, and again, holds those heads further away. So one of those 2 types, and actually quite often in some species of blazing star, the lower portion of the secondary inflorescence looks like this. There's a peduncle of some length, and as you go up to the top, then the heads become more and more sessile, which means they don't have that stem. The fruit is what we call a sepsella. Sepsella is a sort of specialized term, applies to the fruits just in the Asteraceae. It's a dry type of fruit, meaning it doesn't, of course, have any flesh, anything that like a peach or apple would have. It's dry. It has a single seed, just one single seed inside of that fruit. It's an indehiscent fruit. That term simply means that it doesn't split open on its own. It's not going to split apart like legumes do. Instead, it's going to have to just kind of rely on decay or predation or some kind of physical abrasion to open up that fruit to allow the seed to come out. Because the seed, of course, is inside of the fruit. We can see the sepsellas here. This is the sepsella, this dark striated structure right here. And the pappus, again, is attached to the top of the sepsella. That happens to be another important characteristic of the sepsella, having a pappus attached to the top. And the other important thing that separates the sepsella from another fruit that's very, very similar, called an achene, is that the sepsella forms from an inferior ovary, and an achene forms from a superior one. So what we mean by that is shown right here. The ovary here is inferior. It's described as inferior because all the other flower parts, the sepals, which are again modified as this pappus, and petals and stamens are all inserted at a point in this flower above the ovary. So the ovary is inferior or below all of those other flower parts. All right, ecology of the blazing star, a little bit on that. In terms of Iowa, for some reason, my computer is not advancing exactly when I'm trying to, so bear with me. Again, in Iowa, all of the blazing stars occur in some kind of, prairie, savanna, or maybe open woodland type of environment. They're not very shade tolerant as far as that goes. They are C3 species, but they're pretty well adapted to drier environments as a whole. And although we do see some that grow in wet music environments like Doolittle Prairie here, we would see prairie blazing star there. There's some that you can see there. This one is Judson Prairie over in Guthrie County. It has just a tremendous population of scaly blazing star and also some rough blazing star. And probably, as we're going to talk about a little bit, it probably has some hairy blazing star as well, at least it could. Haynes Prairie up in Floyd County, this is a privately owned site. We don't see any blazing stars there, but it would have dwarf blazing star, Liatris cylindracea, or probably would have some rough blazing star as well, Liatris aspera. And then we can't forget, of course, the Lost Hills, and this does not have any blazing stars in it, but because this was taken in the early spring. But this is the habitat you would see Liatris punctata or Liatris aspera out in the Lost Hills. All right, some other ecology. So we think about blazing stars, you should think about pollinators, because they are really attracted to and love blazing stars. The Xerces Society says that the blazing stars are butterfly magnets. And in particular, it's been seen or observed that this one here on the far right, Liatris ligustylus, is really attractive to monarchs for some reason. But there's a lot of pollinators that are attracted to them, either, of course, for nectar or the bees primarily for pollen. There's many Lepidoptera species. So there's a skipper that we see right here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about in just a bit, but skippers, monarchs, painted ladies, black swallowtails, sulfurs, just to name a few. Also many bees, as you can see the bumblebee there in the center, also longhorn bees, leaf-cutting bees, miner bees, sort of carpenter bees, even flower flies, and I've even seen a reference that hummingbirds will utilize the blazing stars. I've not seen that myself. This one here on the far left, again, is a species of skipper, and this happens to be a subspecies of the a subspecies of the Leonard skipper. It's called the Pawnee montane skipper, and it's three subspecies of the Leonard's skipper. And this one, the Pawnee montane skipper subspecies, is the very most restricted one. We have, there's a couple other subspecies that occur pretty much all the way from Canada all the way down through the Midwest over to the East Coast. I put this one up because this one, again, is restricted to just along in the watershed of the South Platte River in Colorado. And this subspecies seems, its range almost exactly corresponds exactly to the range of the dotted blazing star, Liatris punctata, in that part of Colorado. So really tight, it looks like a really tight sort of close association. Again, it's not necessarily it's not the larval plant for it, but it is a very important nectar food source for the skipper. Well, something like blazing star will also be attractive to other herbivores, of course. And there's records, there's data out there that suggests, of course, rabbits will eat, especially younger blazing star leaves. Woodchucks, groundhogs would do the same. Probably more so the younger plants. The Rocky Mountain elk is known to consume blazing star leaves as well. They seem to prefer it more in the fall. Deer will also eat it. There's some research in Michigan that points to deer as well. Deer there. Other grazers, of course, small mammals like the vole you see there, that prairie vole, will utilize seedlings certainly and the younger plants, and are probably more attracted to the corms and will utilize corm tissue as a food source. Grasshoppers will utilize it as well. So there's no doubt that blazing stars are going to be providing at least the potential for some forage value for a group of species. There is evidence that it does contain some, or at least some species contain some toxic alkaloids, but apparently they're not at a real high concentration, since it does seem that they do get consumed to some extent. In fact, if you're out in range country out in the West, the species is lumped into or classified into the group of range plants classified as a decreaser, meaning that it will decrease or disappear if overgrazed by cattle. There are some really important insects that utilize blazing star. There's 2 species here that depend on blazing star species as larval food. The caterpillars of the Shinia gloriosa, the glorious moth, I guess is a common name for it, glorious flower moth. There's another Shinia sanguinea as well. So these are moth species that specifically utilize the blazing stars for their larval food. The larvae feed on the florets, the small flowers, and also the developing seeds. And then there's another species-specific one there, the blazing star borer moth, as you see there, that a larva will bore into the stems of blazing stars. And there is some evidence, apparently, that seed predators, certainly small mammals are likely to utilize the seeds as well. And as we just said, some of the larval forms of the moths utilize the seeds, but even seed-eating birds like finches and pine siskin have been observed utilizing the seeds from blazing star. All right, a little bit about dispersal ecology. So with a pappus like that, and we'll talk more about the pappus a little bit, because it's an important characteristic in separating the blazing stars into a couple of groups. But there was this paper that looked at seed dispersal ecology in, I think it was Scariosa, Liatris Scariosa, published in the American Journal of Botany. And what they did is they looked at several factors to see how they would affect the dispersal distance of these fruits. Now remember, what's going to be happening here is that this pappus is attached to a fruit. That fruit we call the cypsela. This is the pappus of dwarf blazing star here. And inside that fruit, or inside that cypsela, is the seed. So this is the entire propagule, the entire structure that gets moved away from the plant. And of course, with a pappus like this, it's clear that wind dispersal, the pappus is a parachute type of structure that helps to reduce terminal velocity. So a fruit that's released from a parent plant or blown away, it will, of course, go farther with the pappus, with that parachute, or it will fall more slowly to the ground with that, because the air resistance that it causes. So what they did was they looked at these 4 factors right here that are in blue, and they found that, as you might suspect, that so in order to increase the dispersal distance, you'd have to have a smaller fruit mass. So fruit mass and fruit length were negatively correlated with dispersal distance, and pappus length, the length of the pappus, and the fruit width were positively correlated. And then I just threw in a couple more that I think would also obviously be important as well. They didn't study these, but plant height would obviously be helpful. The taller the plant, the taller the fruits are released, the further the fruit has a chance to go. So that's going to be positively correlated. And of course, wind speed. In this study, they basically held these two factors constant and looked at the effect of those 4 factors there. So what I did was I calculated a thing that I just simply called the dispersal index that utilized data that I could find on 3 of these factors, fruit mass. Again, this is looking at just flora of North America and looking at measurements that are made, this came from Prairie Moon Nursery and the data they provide on seed weight. So I'm not sure if they're measuring the fruit. I imagine they are just measuring the fruit. So I'm guessing this is the fruit mass then. And it ranges from 1.8 to 7.1 milligrams. The smallest one here was Liatris aspera, and the largest one was Liatris punctata. And that again came from Prairie Moon. Then I looked at flora of North America to get fruit lengths and plant heights. Those are the only ones other data I could find. And again, plant fruit length, that ranged from 4.3 to 7.8 millimeters. The smallest fruit lengths were pink Nastachia, Prairie blazing star, and the longest fruit lengths were in punctata, again, dotted blazing star. And plant heights, 50, that represents dwarf blazing star, Liatris cylindracea, and 140 represents Liatris aspera. And then pink Nastachia was a close second there. So I took these 3 factors in these data basically, and calculated a dispersal index that basically combines all 3 of these, integrates all 3 of these into one number, a dispersal index. And this is how it came out. And these only show 6 of the 8 species in Iowa, but the 6 that had data. And so aspera has the highest ability to disperse, basically, again, based on this. Pink Nastachia second, on down towards the bottom, scaly, and dotted blazing star the lowest. Well, Gravow et al. Also, in addition to looking at dispersal factors, they also looked at germination success. And they found a really strong correlation there between the ability for wind dispersal. So species that have really high wind dispersal, so again, these species here at the top, are correlated with low germination. They also have a lower germination rate. And it's probably because this lower seed mass. In order to be very well dispersed, have high wind dispersal, again, the fruit mass, that was the most important factor. It was the #1 factor here of all 4 of these. Lower seed mass is going to help do that. So a smaller amount of endosperm in those seeds also translated into less success in germination. The germination rates varied anywhere from 29% to 41%. And that was germination rates done with seed that was not stratified. All right, then one more little topic, a bit on fire. Obviously, since blazing stars do thrive in prairie and savanna habitats, they appear to be well adapted to fire, and that certainly would seem the case, certainly with respect to those root structures. Clearly, like any plant that's exposed to enough heat and flames, I mean, they're going to be top killed, certainly, but with those well-developed corms, and this is a corm over here on the left of Liatris hirsuta, hairy blazing star. It's about 3 inches in diameter. Here's the corms from dotted blazing stars. I said they get a little bit more elongate, more growing downward. But with really well-developed storage structures like that, it's clearly going to be, I think, pretty easy for those plants to survive any type of top killing. And so they are considered to be very, very tolerant to fire because of that, because of those corms and rhizomes. But the specific response that you're going to see in a blazing star and the species is going to depend upon those 3 factors you have there, that I see there. Time of year is always going to be important because the time of year, the time the fire occurs, always has a really high priority when it comes to the type of effect that you're going to see. time of the year that the fire occurs, juxtaposed with basically the plant's life cycle and what stage of growth it is in the growing season. And for Liatris, it seems that spring, it's been observed that spring is better from the standpoint of the blazing stars tolerate spring fire much better than they do a fall or late summer fire. And that's basically attributed to the idea that Liatris are, they're described as warm season, but that does not mean they're C4. They are C3, but warm season just in the sense that they attain their peak growth and flower in the late summer, usually during the warmest part of the growing season. And so again, a fire that's going to occur during that time is probably going to be more stressful. Another important factor is just the amount of litter that's present. And that's what fire does. It removes that litter, the amount of mulch and litter present. And if there's a lot of dense litter present, then usually there's a much more positive response in those plants than if there's not very much there at all. It is the change in the microclimate that occurs after a fire, after the fire has removed that litter, and many more things than I have time to talk about here occur in that environment. And then the third important factor is the post-fire precipitation. And of course, this is really especially important for those species that inhabit the most dry portions of the environment. Because again, if it's really, really dry, then a layer of litter or mulch can actually be somewhat positive to that environment and to the growth of that plant, because it can help to conserve soil moisture. There'll be less evaporation of moisture from the soil in those cases. So it gets complicated, basically, again, in terms of the type of response that you're actually going to see because of those three factors there. It looked at a few specific studies, and I'll just mention those briefly here. I still have some time. These are some published effects. The first one is a paper that looked at the effect of, they looked at 1 and 2 burns, so doing a burn just once and then doing burn 2 years in a row. So 1 burn versus 2 burns, and then looked at that compared to a control, no burns, and these were late April burns. The intent was to look at the effect of those 2 types of fire on the mycorrhizae and root hairs. Now this was done on Liatris spicata, on a prairie called the Jennings Blazing Star Prairie out in Pennsylvania, which is a remnant, and this was done back in the 80s. What they found was, I mentioned this because all of the plants that they examined, there were 74 plants of Liatris spicata that were sampled to examine. Some of them were in the control, some were in the 1 burn, some were in the two burn plots, but all of them, all 74, had mycorrhizae. So mycorrhizae is obviously a very common and dependable type of interaction in Liatris. And it is really for 95% of plants. But what they found was that the fire really didn't have any kind of effect at all on those mycorrhizae. There was no difference in the percentages of roots that had vesicular or busticular mycorrhizae associated with them among those 3 treatments. And you'd kind of suspect that maybe a little bit, because most of the effects of fire and the heating effect, there's not much heat that goes down into the soil. There is a modest amount, maybe an inch or so, but most studies have shown very little kind of heating effect anyway that would be attributed to some kind of mycorrhizae effect down in the soil, because there's just not much heat that goes down into the soil. The second study there, strong stimulation of fecundity. This was a study done on northern blazing star, Liatris scariosa. This was done out in Maine. So they looked at here were several factors, and again, what the effect of fire was basically on the fecundity. Fecundity is the amount of seeds that are produced, the amount of offspring. And they found 4 important things. They found that these are things that fire did. It definitely stimulated the fecundity. Fire had a strong stimulating effect. And there were 4 ways it did this. There was a 4-fold increase in the number of flowering stems on the burn plots compared to those that had not been burned. So just more vegetative growth, more ramets. Number 2, the number of seeds per flower head was greater on the plants, again, in the burn plots. Number 3, among the flower heads, they found that the percentage of seeds that were predated by those Shinia moss, the flower moss I showed you earlier, on the burn plots, the plants in the burn plots, there was less infestation of moth larvae compared to, again, in plants that were in plots that were not burned. So the burning seemed to decrease the incidence of predation there by the moth. And then the number 4 effect was that the overall effect of seedling establishment. So they measured seedling establishment afterwards, after the burn as well. And seedling establishment was much greater in, again, burned plots that had been burned at least over the last previous 20 months than in plots that had not been burned for at least 4 years. So some kind of recent burning, at least within the last almost 2 years, was still beneficial in providing more germination than plots that had not been burned for 4 years. And then the last one down here, the increases in plant biomass and numbers, that was another study done on that same prairie at Jennings Blazing Star Prairie in Pennsylvania. This time it was looking at the effects of 1 and 2 burns, again done in the spring, on the resource allocation in the stems, the leaves, the inflorescences, and the roots and the corms of Liatris spicata. And the goal was mainly to see if what had been always observed is this increase in inflorescences, increase in flowering after fire, specifically wanted to find out whether that was due to a reallocation of resources or shifting energy from one place to another, or was that due to just an increase in plant growth and plant biomass. And what they found was after 2 successive spring burns, total biomass, again, of Blazing Star increased 160%, and that was because of an increase in biomass that occurred in stems, increased stem biomass, increased biomass in inflorescences, all the flowers, and increased biomass in the corms. Also, the number of inflorescences per square meter also went up too. But they didn't find any differences in the heights of those plants and the inflorescences or the number of heads. They found that while fire increased the growth, obviously the growth in the biomass, it did not have any effect on the percent resource allocation. So no matter whether they were burned or not, plants simply did the same amount of percentage of their allocation of energy to those structures. It's just that the plants that were burned had a lot more growth, had a lot more biomass to work with, and so they produced more flowers. All right, now we're going to take a look at the Liatris in Iowa real quick here. There's this table that shows basic quick information. It shows the nomenclature according to Flora of North America and the status and what the coefficient of conservatism is here. Don't have time to go into that a lot this morning, but basically this is a measure of how much affinity, you might say, a plant has, or how much a plant requires. The larger the number means it requires more pristine, natural environments that are free from human disturbance. So again, a number approaching 10 is the highest, is indicative then of a species that you would expect to see then in very high quality sites. And what this shows is the coefficient's original value when it came out in 2000, and the new revised value that was recently accomplished by a group of us revising all of these coefficients and trying to make them more accurate, and then also providing a designation of how much confidence we have in that coefficient. So this is Liatris asper here stayed the same, 8 to 8, but our confidence is very high. Cylindracea dropped from a 10 to an 8. Confidence is still very high. This shows the nomenclature in Eilers and Rosa, the current checklist of Iowa plants. This gives you some habitats. This shows the Iowa biogeography, the range of the species in Iowa according to Iowa Prairie Plants by Christensen and Muller. I think this is probably our best information as far as what the native range of that species was in Iowa. And then, of course, the BONAP map gives you a bigger picture and shows you what the distribution is for the species across the entire United States and Canada. So asper is a very common species, as you can see. It is also one that tends to be found more in dry environments. Cylindracea is much confined to the northeast corner of the state, as you can see. Now, hirsuta, so this is a new one. This is a new species by Flora of North America, which came out in 2006, work of Nessum, 2006. He split some subspecies that were in squarosa. So this always was present in Iowa as Liatris squarosa variety hirsuta. That variety is split out now as its own species, Liatris hirsuta. So we don't have a map from Iowa Prairie Plants because that hadn't been done yet. And so I'm just using the BONAP map here, basically, and replicating what it shows here, that it's mainly a Western Iowa species, of course. And then the other one of concern is Liatris lancifolia. This one is indicated by indicated by BONAP, not Flora of North America. Flora of North America does not recognize it as being in Iowa. But BONAP recognizes it right over here, and it's this little record right down here in Montgomery County. So this is, and there's only one voucher for it. So this is kind of a little bit of a mystery. The voucher again is from 1992. The label says that it was collected on a grassy roadside at the top of a slope with other native grasses, Liatris aspera. It occurs along Highway 34, about 5.5 miles southeast of Red Oak, between Red Oak and Stanton. And looking at the voucher, just a picture of it, I haven't seen it in person, but looking at a picture of it, it does look like it could be lance leaf. Lance leaf, as you can see, is a Great Plains species, occurs out to the west of us. So it seems, somewhat feasible that maybe this is a record. The problem with roadsides is that you've got two possibilities. In southern Iowa, and certainly in the Lost Hills in western Iowa, a good number of prairie remnants occur along the sides of roads. That is a common place to see a remnant prairie. On the other hand, roadsides are also a place where plantings are done. So it'd be nice to visit this site and probably talk to people in Montgomery County and see if they could shed some light on this and see exactly maybe what the origin of that plant might be. But the Flora of Iowa Working Group considered it to be a likely native species, so we gave it a 7L. All right, then there's 4 more species here. Northern, clearly restricted to the northern tier of counties. You only plant that if you're up here. Punctata is mainly a western Iowa species. It does occur in the western half on really, really dry, gravelly, moreno, maybe sandy types of really coarse soils. Pycnostakia is, again, the other really common species, pretty much statewide, except it's absent, of course, in the Lost Hills, seems like. And then squarosa. So again, this is the squarosa that has remained squarosa, and it is represented by 2 varieties here. Flora of North America says we've got glabrata, but I think we also must have squarosa too, because much of our squarosa that I think occurs in the state does have some hairiness on it. So that should be helpful in understanding where Liatris grows in Iowa and the species we have. The last 10 minutes here, we're going to take a quick look at, this is just some information that came from the table. Real quick, quite a few hybrids are reported. So this is a species that does readily hybridize between species. 4 of these, there's 12 that are represented in the ITIS, 12 of them that are accepted and reported there. 4 of them do involve species that occur in Iowa. So these 4 hybrids could be encountered in theory. And then these are some species that occur just outside of Iowa's borders, but as far as we know, do not occur in Iowa. All right, the last part here is a key to help you separate these 8 species. I went ahead and used all 8 species in this key. Keying out 8 species doesn't take too long. It's pretty easy. We can separate them into 2 groups of 4 very quickly. Group A and Group B here, as I've indicated on this one characteristic right here. You need the pappus. You need to have the fruits and the pappus. And you will see again that the difference there, as it's describing, is that Group A are described as barbellate. They just have these little tiny barbs because the cilia, those little branches off the main axis, are very short. There's the little barb-like projections off the main stem here. Whereas the plumose, that's the right way of saying that, plumose, have longer cilia and look more like the feather veins, you see in a feather. So it splits out into Group A and Group B. These 4 species in Group A, these 4 in Group B. And then we're going to take Group A and we're going to split out 2 of them based upon the number of disc florets in each head. So these 2 species, Pycnostachya and Lancifolia, look very similar. They have very few, 4 to 9, whereas the other 2 are in A2 here, going to have 14 to 80. So many more than that. We also see this difference in the number of veins, 3 to 5 veins in the lower stem leaves versus 1 main vein. And there's a little bit of a difference in the shape of that involucre and the length to width ratio. We're going to take Group A1 first here, and we're going to split them then into those 2 species, splitting Pycnostachya from Lancifolia. And these 2 do look alike. You're going to look at those filiary apices. So again, those filaries, those involucre bracts right here, this is the involucre. Each of these individual bracts here, involucre bract is a filary. You can see that they are very acuminate, long tapering to a point. They're reflexed or recurved. That's what we're seeing right here, reflexed or spreading. The stems are usually pretty hairy. Pilose means hairy with fairly long spreading kinds of hairs. But they can become, and this is the problem, the variation, they can become less hairy and almost glabrous towards the base. So there's some pictures of Prairie. And then for Lancifolia, those filaries, and it was hard to find some pictures of this one. But here, so there's actually 2 vouchers here. I've got some pictures of vouchers. But you can see that these filaries in here are not at all like these. The filary apices are much more rounded and obtuse and pretty much oppressed. That means they're pressed down flat against that involucre. They're not recurved or reflexed backwards. And the stems are almost always glabrous in this species. All right, then, whoops. Now we're going to go back to A2. So Group A2, these are the ones with lots of florets. So we got the, okay, A2 again are these right here. So lots of florets, 1 main vein, just to remind you. Now we're going to separate those again by the actual number of florets. So really huge amount of florets versus a more moderate number of florets. And then also sort of that terminal head, how that looks. The terminal head in Ligulostylus is much more sort of distinctly larger than the other ones. This third character is not one that's going to be easy to see. You have to get the disc flowers and take the corolla tube apart and look at the inside of it. But if you do, the corolla tube on the inside is going to be smooth and glabrous. There's no hairs there. If you do the same thing with Aspera, you're going to see that there's hairs inside of it. You usually don't need to go that far. You can just use the number of heads or the distinction of the heads more uniform here than up here. Now, another useful one, I think, though, it's not in the key, is the phyllaries again. Look at these phyllaries here on Aspera. They have the tops of them have this membranous sort of kind of a rise or blister kind of structure, whereas the phyllaries on Ligustylus don't look like that at all. And the rough blazing star also has some punctate glands. The leaves have those little dotted glands in them as well. These two are pretty distinctly different, although large Aspera might sort of resemble Ligustylus. All right, group B, the last four. We're going to split one off. So B1 is just one species, it's punctata, and it's separating out from the other three over here on the basis of, again, the number of disc florets, 3 to 8 versus 10 to 60, and also the size of those leaves. Punctata has very narrow leaves. The largest leaves only get up to about 4 millimeters wide and just have one main vein, lots of glands. And over here, this group, the largest leaves are going to generally be at least 6 millimeters wide, up to 12, and they're going to have 3 to 5 main veins. Now, some of these can have some gland dotted, and it's weakly gland dotted, so that might be something to watch out for, but pretty distinct there. The leaves are, I think, a little more crowded on punctata 2 than on these. Then we're going to separate, of these three, we're going to separate Cylindracea, the dwarf blazing star, off first. There's some pictures of it, and that's basically looking at the phyllaries again, and that they're oppressed or at least strongly ascending, and those tips are more rounded, broadly rounded. They can have a little tiny mucinate tip. You can kind of see that on these right here. And that's going to separate then Cylindracea in B2 from the other two species in B2, because these have phyllaries that are abruptly spreading or recurved with, again, a much more long, slender, pointed bract. And you can see that right here on Scaly. So again, these bracts look a lot different than these involucral bracts or phyllaries right here. Clearly different. The way to separate Squarosa and Hirsuta then is also these bracts. Maybe these are the two that used to be the same species, but now there's Hirsuta is separated off as hairy. The things that I found are the best are going to be the phyllaries. These are more or less equal from the bottom to the top in terms of their size. So more or less is what that means there. Phyllaries more or less equal. The outer usually as long or maybe slightly longer than the inner, the ones further up. The leaves can be weakly gland dotted. Now, if you can get the fruit, the sepselli, they're going to be a little bit smaller, 4 to 5.5, than the sepsella on Hirsuta, 5.5 to 6.5. The phyllaries on Hirsuta are more or less unequal. The outer are noticeably longer. So here's some pictures of them. It was hard to find good pictures of this that you could be sure were right, but here's some right here. Here's some more right here. You can kind of see that these phyllaries look like they're a lot longer and a lot larger further down. And there's more of a size difference among those phyllaries as you go from the bottom towards the top. That's probably the best way to separate those two species. One last slide, and I'm done. I thought I'd just throw a slide in real quick. I'll be quick here on humans and blazing stars. So blazing stars they're so beautiful, of course, and they're so hardy. It's not surprising they have been moved from prairie into the gardens. And so there's been many species are in cultivation. There's many cultivated ornamental versions or forms. Liatris spicata has this cobalt variety we see right here. Scariosa, there's a snow white. Pycnostichia is an alba. This is punctata. They don't have a name for it, but you're going to see these in lots of flower gardens. And of course, some of them have been modified a little bit in terms of the flower color, but very popular, of course, because they're very easy to grow in the flower garden, especially if you have a drier site. ethnobotanically, food. So clearly with those large corms and rhizomes, lots of food storage in there. Not surprising that Native Americans utilize those for food. The Native American Ethnobotany Database, which is a very large online database that contains over 44,000 listings that document the use of plants, either as foods, drugs, dye, fibers, other types of uses, of over 4,000 plants by over 290 Native American groups. So it's a really useful database. Point out that the Kiowa, for example, in the springtime in particular, utilize the roots. They would gather roots and bake them over fire and consume them that way. The other use, of course, was medicinal, and that was probably even more important, it seems like. I find it interesting, if you look at, and this is in Kelly Kinchner's book, Medicinal Plants of the Prairie, something like that, but he points out that the Omaha and Ponca name for Liatris aspera, for example, is, if you translate what they were saying to English, is hard medicine. And the Pawnee name translates to round medicine. So clearly they were looking at this plant as a medicinal plant. And I'm guessing hard and round probably suggests to some extent that they're using those corms probably as a source of plant material. But they indicate, again, the Native American Ethnobotany database indicates many curative uses. The Blackfoot used the plant as a poultice of boiled roots. So again, using the roots of the corm, poultice of that to apply to swellings. An infusion of the roots was used for stomach aches. In the Meskwaki, they used an infusion of the root to apply to areas that had an itch. And they also used infusion of the root to solve problems with blood in the urine or for women with bladder problems. It also lists some other things, expectorant for weak hearts as well. So clearly seem to be a very important plant from a medicinal point of view. And it's interesting that then if you look at modern medical chemistry, there is actually work that confirms that there are some medicinal values. There are a couple papers here just as an example, and there's certainly more than two, but have identified an isolated chemical compound, spignolid, which seems to be sort of an anti-tumor compound, and liatrin, which is anti-leukemic, meaning that it has sort of countering the effects of leukemia. Obviously some science there that backs up the idea that the plant has some medicinal values. That's all I've got. There's the list of some of the references for pictures and papers. I don't know if there's probably not time for questions, but maybe at the end of the seminar, or meeting, I should say.
Great, thanks, Tom. I think just if you can probably answer this one very quickly. There was really only one question that was left unanswered. There's been a lot of chatter in the chat box. Roughly how far does rough blazing star disperse?
Oh, they didn't provide very good estimates of that. It was done in a controlled situation in a wind tunnel with just a small amount of wind. So they were trying to look for, again, just those relationships of how things were correlated. And so not very realistic, of course. But I would suspect, based on, again, what they found, that, with a good, strong wind, you could certainly get several meters. Those Cypsella could get several meters away from a plant, especially if from a taller plant. But I can't say for sure.
Up on deck, and then we will have a short break, is Laura Walter with the Tallgrass Prairie Center. Laura received her BS in biology and her MS in plant ecology from K-State University, where she carried out field research at the Konza Prairie Biological Station. In January 2019, Laura joined the Tallgrass Prairie Center as the Plant Materials Program Manager. She manages the on-site seed bank, greenhouse, and seed production fields and promotes communication among stakeholders in the native seed supply chain. So thank you for joining us, Laura.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be with you today, even in this virtual setting. I really wish we could be together in person, but I know how, we all have to be safe still. So I appreciate Sarah's inviting me to speak on this topic. I want to say right off the bat that I don't consider myself an expert in it, and that's part of the reason why I said yes, which is a little bit weird, I realize. Because one of the things that I worry about is that I'm a little scared of change, like most people, and I was a bit of two minds about this prospect of talking with you. But I really think it's something that we need to start talking about, even though my gut was telling me this is a can of worms and watch out. I've spent a couple of months since Sarah contacted me about this, mulling over some information from a bunch of different sources. I went to an online workshop last September on climate-informed seed sourcing. I've been reading the newly released standards on native seeds and restoration from the Society for Ecological Restoration. And I've been dipping my toes kind of into the shallow end of the scientific literature on the topic and reflecting on how all of this relates to how things are currently done here. So in the talk today, I just want to give you a broad stroke sketch of where I'm coming from, both literally and figuratively, kind of exposing some of my biases, the general context of how I see business as usual seed sourcing for restoration in Iowa, and some of the challenging questions that climate change presents for us. If you're if you've been involved in this prairie restoration or reconstruction business for a while, you probably get irritated with my looseness in the terminology, but please be assured that when I'm talking restoration, oftentimes I actually mean reconstruction of prairies from seed in places where they were historically removed and absent. So I am not going to be able to provide you with clear answers as to what we should do about climate change, but I provide some suggestions toward the end of the talk. And I'm also interested in your thoughts and questions. At a few points in the talk, I'll pause, give myself a chance to get a sip of water and maybe talk a little bit about your comments and questions. I'm also available on email, and my email address will be available at the end of the talk. I'm also on the Tallgrass Prairie Center website. So where am I coming from? So where does my perspective come from? I spent much of my childhood and my early adulthood in the Flint Hills upland region of Kansas. Sarah mentioned that I did research on the Conza Prairie Prairie Biological Station. The name's changed. And this is a photo that I took during my graduate program there. Throughout my childhood and young adulthood, prairies, which were extensive and used as cattle pastures, were just a short bike ride or a long walk from anywhere I lived. And to this very day, when I need solitude or a place that just settles my mind and allows me to think, I gravitate toward prairie. So when it started to loom over me that I needed to figure out what I was going to say to you today, I went for a walk. And I soon found myself admiring the reconstructed rotary prairie at Big Woods Lake near Cedar Falls. And that's the trail that you can see in this picture. The snow was starting to fall, and I wanted to get a photo without getting my camera wet. So I hunkered down in the information kiosk there briefly and looked around. There on a wall was this sign with a quote from Larry Stone, who may or may not be with us today. I don't know. If so, Larry, hi. And it centered me on the common values that bring us together today, our shared value, our care and reverence for remnant prairies, the history and community of people who have protected and restored prairies across the state, and our desire to learn from observing and studying both remnant and planted prairies. It was fun to me to see the names of Daryl Smith and David Williams and a mention of the Native Roadside Vegetation Center on this plaque as well, because that evolved into the Tallgrass Prairie Center, which is where I work. So I've spent the last 2 years working at the Tallgrass Prairie Center at UNI. I'm deeply grateful to our founder, Daryl Smith, and the past staff for building a strong foundation for our organization. You're probably familiar with the TBC, but it has evolved over time to stay relevant and resilient. And I'll briefly get you up to speed on some new developments here. Our mission is to empower people to value and restore resilient, diverse tallgrass prairie. We want to expand the area of prairie in Iowa for all of the benefits that it provides for our soils, water, wildlife, and people. We can't do this alone. So we have partners and funders that we work with, collaborators, and we also look for the leverage points and change makers within the systems that influence land use in our state. The TPC currently has 4 key programs. They're Iowa Roadside Management, the Prairie on Farms program, Research and Restoration, and Plant Materials, along with a couple of projects that cross the program boundaries, such as our Prairie Roots project. You may have seen those root specimens at museums and nature centers around the state, and the urban prairie restoration that we work on in Benton County. Iowa Roadside Management, this program guided by Christine Nemec is the oldest at the center. It encourages counties to participate in integrated roadside vegetation management. I think Tom mentioned that roadsides are a key place where restoration is done. This supports a community of practice among roadside managers to help sustain current county programs. It also supplies county roadside programs with enough native prairie seed to plant around 1,200 acres of roadsides per year across Iowa. The seed, about 85% of the seed is yellow tag certified, meaning that its genetic origin is traceable to Iowa remnant prairies and it has not been intentionally selected. Our Prairie on Farms program arose from the recognition that the overwhelming majority of the land area of Iowa is privately owned and in row crop agriculture, and that planted prairie can help offset the environmental problems that result from modern intensive agricultural methods. This program provides research and demonstration sites, field days and other networking events, and technical information to enable prairie planting within working landscapes. Program manager Andrew Dunham is pictured, explaining the use of a Truex seed drill at a virtual field day held this fall. The Research and Restoration program, managed by Dr. Justin Meisen, who's also on the board of Iowa Prairie Network, carries out research designed to test questions with direct application to restoration in our region. He strives to improve our understanding of prairie reconstruction and ecology, while at the same time putting more prairie back on the landscape. He uses a combination of formal experimentation as well as demonstration teaching sites to answer relevant questions that landmakers and decision makers have about creating and maintaining prairie plantings in many different types of situations. And finally, I guess last but not least, I've managed the plant materials program for the past 2 years. This program evolved out of the Iowa Ecotype project and continues its mission to support a native seed supply for roadsides and other restorations that's diverse, regionally appropriate, source identified, and affordable. The program was initiated shortly after the adoption of IRVM by the state in recognition of the lack of availability of well-adapted and diverse native prairie seed at the scale needed for roadside plantings. The 30-year history of this program represents an investment in ideas, infrastructure, and equipment, as well as a seed bank that includes hundreds of samples of seed from both remnant prairies and production plots. This history is bound to affect how I think about changes to seed sourcing in response to climate change. To be perfectly honest, thinking about this kind of change makes me a little uncomfortable. All of the foundation seed produced at the TPC starts with seed collected from Iowa remnant prairies. The prairie you see pictured here is a Cedar Hill sand prairie, which is one of the closest remnants to the TPC site. The first accessions for the program were made in the early 1990s. There may be people here today in the meeting who were involved in building the seed bank, and I'm really, really grateful for the work that everyone did. It required an incredible investment of botanical expertise, deep knowledge of remnant prairies, and sheer miles traveled and hours spent. Over 30 years, these efforts netted about 3,000 seed samples of over 100 species. The definition that you see here is pulled right off of the Iowa Prairie Network website, which defines an ecotype as a subset of species that has adapted to a specific geographic environment, and as a result has evolved to be genetically distinct from other members of the same species found in different environments. How you define an ecotype, therefore, depends on how you define the specific geographic environment. This was a really big question as the Iowa Ecotype project got started. Eventually, the Iowa Ecotype project settled on 3 zones based on county boundaries north to south within the state of Iowa. And this was an effort to balance considerations both of biology and practicality. The decision was based on the importance of the north-south temperature gradient and plant hardiness, and the effects of latitude on the timing of plant growth and reproduction, such as prairie blazing star. Coincidentally, that's the one that I chose right after Tom gave his talk. Liatris pycnostachya, that's shown in these images. So each of these ecotypes was at a different flowering stage, even though the images were taken on the same day at the same site, reflecting the adaptations that those plants have for their latitudinal regions. The definition of the IEP zones did not take into account the differences in soils and topography across the landform regions within a zone. You can see that those zone boundaries kind of cross over those landform region boundaries. And so they had to make some compromises to help enable the native seed market for each zone to be profitable so that seed could be produced commercially at the scale needed. To produce a regional ecotype, we grow seed from several accessions from across the zone together in production plots. You can see the process involves starting from those remnant collections, pooling those accessions, growing out little seedlings in the greenhouse, transplanting those into our production plots. We use single species production plots. There are other ways of doing things as well. And then we harvest and clean that seed and store it under cool, dry conditions. At each production step, we're cognizant of the risk of unintentional selection. And so we attempt to avoid that because we want to retain the genetic diversity from those original remnant populations. We release seed to growers when they request it for the purpose of starting their production fields, and they increase production to the scale needed to supply seed for restoration in various contexts. And the final image that you see there is the TPC, our shed, our equipment shed, when it's full of pallets full of native seed ready for distribution to county roadside programs. When our seed supplies for an ecotype run low or decline in quality, we refresh them by growing them out again. And we have first generation seed that we've stored in for this purpose in a deep freezer on site. The growers who use our foundation to start growing new species or for refreshing their old fields can certify their seed as Iowa Source Identified Class or Yellow Tag seed through the Iowa Crop Improvement Association's program. The source ID seed they produce becomes available for purchase on the native seed market, and it receives a preference in the bidding structure for Iowa DOT seed purchases. The seed not sold to the DOT is available for other seed consumers. This partnership that you see represented in this supply chain on this slide has helped to build a native seed market in this area whose diversity is the envy of other regions. So this is how we've been doing things for nearly 30 years. So let's take a look next at how seed consumers in our state make their sourcing decisions, considering this background and context. So I'm going to take a break for a moment and get a sip of water. And I wondered if Sarah maybe could let me know if there were any comments or questions in the chat.
We do have one question related to roadsides.
Mm-hmm.
So often we have roadside plantings and then construction takes place and those plantings may be removed. So how can we enable road construction where necessary without losing previously planted prairies?
Oh, wow. That's an excellent question. I don't have the answer to that. It would be a great one to forward on to the chief landscape architect of the DOT. She would be one who would probably have a clear answer for you. I think a lot of what happens is then replanting of those areas, but the loss of something that's well established is that is a significant thing. I don't know if plant rescue would be possible in some of those situations. It's a great question, and I'd love to. Sarah, is there a way to make a note of this for follow-up later?
Sure. Yeah, I can connect Patrick with you, and you can help get him over to Shauna, or even if it makes sense for Christine to get in on that conversation as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay.
And beyond that, that's all we have so far.
Okay, so we're good to go. So I've said everything perfectly. Nobody has any, no, that's not really true. Okay, let's move ahead into some areas where I think people will probably have some ways of weighing in on some of these. So I'm going to be describing sort of what our business as usual system is for sourcing seed for prairie reconstruction in Iowa. And so I've summarized the range of restoration contexts that we have, different seed source types, and some of the guidelines that different organizations and groups use in making seed sourcing decisions. But the picture that I'm going to draw is, hopefully it's kind of the broad strokes outline, but it's not super comprehensive or detailed. So there are going to be some things that are left out, and people can certainly feel free to comment on those or ask questions about them. So everything that we do in Iowa is against this backdrop, I think. We have this highly altered landscape. Our remnants are fragmented and isolated. They exist within this hostile environment of intensive agriculture. And even when those remnants have been identified and are protected from direct destruction, they still face stressors such as altered hydrology around them, nutrient deposition, herbicide and pesticide drift, invasive species, and altered fire and grazing regimes, or completely the loss of those factors. And I don't think that we can overstate the importance of remnants. This is one that I visited for the first time this year, Ludwig Prairie, and just found it just stunning. No planted prairie can yet match the diversity of species, the complex networks of biological relationships that characterize our remnant prairies. They provide us with references to show what plant communities adapted in these soils and climates, and irreplaceable genetic resources in the form of the locally adapted seed. So I believe that we are called, first and foremost, to defend and carefully manage remnants and to do no further harm. At the same time, the degree of alteration of Iowa's landscape has produced environmental problems that can often be cured or at least ameliorated with a prescription of planted prairie. And that means that we need seed. We need enough and diverse seed to meet restoration needs in a variety of contexts and a variety of scales. And the decisions that people are going to make in these different contexts are going to be, they're going to be different. So I have adapted the idea of a restorative continuum to our state to look at the idea, to look at how each restoration context affects the seed sourcing decisions. On the left end of the diagram is native plant use in urban gardens. And Tom alluded to this. He showed some of the cultivars of Liatris that are used in garden situations. And this category probably departs the most from what we typically consider, our reconstruction. And it departs from the goals of those. It's the smallest in terms of the scale of each planting. But even these plantings have the potential to affect populations of certain types of wildlife, for example, pollinators and songbirds. I know it came up in the chat whether some of the cultivars used in gardens are as good for pollinators as the native wild type plants, and I would agree that it would be better to use the locally adapted material. However, I think the cultivars are kind of a better than nothing thing. We could have long arguments about this, but there are benefits to having plants in gardens. The proximity of these plantings to the public has the opportunity of increasing awareness and hopefully positively of native plants and habitats. My own backyard garden is a little bit chaotic for most people's tastes, and so I don't know if I'm the best example or ambassador for this. It's unlikely that these plantings in urban gardens are near enough to a remnant to cause unintended introductions of genotypes or species. Therefore, I think we can be a little bit more relaxed in our seed and plant sourcing guidelines for gardens. So we move to the right, we find conservation plantings on working farmland that have a goal of providing specific functions for a relatively short time period, so the 10 to 15 years of a typical CRP contract. The choice of seed in this case depends on the desired functions, so the goals and objectives of the project, the landowner's values, the budget, government cost share programs, the availability of species, in the native seed market for that purpose. Skilled conservation planners balance these potentially competing factors along with their understanding of site conditions and reference communities, and develop seed mixes that will establish quickly and provide the desired functions. Unless the planting is within 1 mile of a known remnant or under contract for more than 15 years, there's no requirement to use local ecotype seed. Of course, there's also no prohibition against them. This category, the conservation plantings, is the largest in scale and landscape level impact. Currently, about 1.5 million acres in the state are enrolled in CRP practices, many of which require at least some native species. They vary in the amount of diversity that's required. As we move to the right, we encounter the roadside plantings that are designed to provide multiple functions, from short-term stabilization of soil following construction to the long-term benefits such as reduced inputs, erosion prevention, improved infiltration of precipitation, and habitat for pollinators and other wildlife. Roadsides make up more than half of the publicly held land in Iowa. In this context, plantings are intended to be long-term and self-sustaining, so diversity of species and genetics and adaptation to the local climate and soils are important seed sourcing considerations. Plantings are fairly large in scale and highly visible to the public. Since the adoption of IRBM by the state, more than 50,000 acres of Iowa roadsides have been planted with native species. Finally, at the other end, we have plantings on public or private preserves, where the goal is to restore the area to reference conditions defined by the study of remnant prairies. These plantings should be diverse and comprised of locally adapted plant populations that are self-regenerating, persistent, and resilient. Seed sources are chosen carefully to avoid introducing new species or genotypes into existing remnants. Such plantings, if bordering remnants, may help to buffer them from the degradation by the stressors that I mentioned earlier. I've also summarized the types of prairie seed sources that native consumers can choose from. And this is, I got these 3 broad categories. They're not going to encompass every possibility, but they'll give you an idea of some of the range. So remnant collected seed for direct use and restoration is on the left end of the spectrum. And this is the safe approach when working near remnant prairies. It preserves local genetic adaptation that should aid in establishing a long-lasting plant community. However, small and isolated populations may lack genetic diversity. This isn't always the case, and there's some research interest in this question. So I think we'll be learning more about that as we go. One other risk of this approach is that overharvest of seed from remnant populations could break that vow we take to do no harm. And this approach comes with some challenges. Obtaining enough seed for the restoration purpose. Having the botanical expertise and labor with that expertise to collect seed of each species when it's ready. These issues can be overcome, for instance, through planting local increase plots or by phasing in a reconstruction over several years and using seed from initial phases in later phases. If we look at the other end of the spectrum, at the right side, is cultivars. The main benefit I see of cultivars is that they are inexpensive and somewhat predictable. Cultivars have been selected for traits like rapid establishment and growth, and they may provide specified functions such as soil stabilization or forage production. On the other hand, they may lack local adaptations. You would have to choose them carefully and choose cultivars that are based on remnant accessions from your area. And if they lack those local adaptations, they may establish poorly, or conversely, because they're selected for establishment and growth characteristics, they may be overly competitive, resulting in loss of diversity from a planting over time. And clearly, because of those risks, I would hate to see them planted next to a prairie remnant. In the middle, I've placed source-identified native seed, such as Iowa ecotype seed, which is derived from remnant collections, but increased under agronomic conditions to commercial scale without intentional selection. Over 100 species are available for purchase on the native seed market in Iowa that fit this category. And they average around 20% more expensive than cultivars, although there's a lot of variation from species to species. Seed production for larger scale restoration helps to eliminate overharvesting from remnant populations. And pooling of these populations from across the region, so creating a regional admixture, both retains those local adaptations and maximizes the genetic diversity in the seed source. A diverse gene pool helps ensure that at least some members of the planted population will be able to establish and persist in a restoration site, and it may improve resilience to future changes. The risk of this approach is that unintentional selection during seed production can cause a loss of that diversity. But growers can use best practices that have been identified to help retain genetic diversity through several generations and avoid selection or genetic drift in production populations. Now, these source types aren't mutually exclusive, and they aren't, this doesn't include all of the range of different production methods that are out there, such as growing plants in mixtures and harvesting bulk seed. So there's a lot of different choices available. Now, if your budget constrains your choices, you still have a range of options. For example, if you've got this limited budget, you're leaning towards the cultivars, but you want to include locally adapted material and increase genetic diversity, you could purchase a portion of seed that is source identified and from pooled regional sources, or use a portion of seed from locally collected ecotypes. So we've got these different contexts, we've got these different seed sources, seed source types. So what kinds of guidelines do different organizations and groups use in creating their decisions, making their decisions about the seed source that they need? The first one, and kind of a foundation, is the idea that local is best. This paradigm rests on a body of experience and evidence that suggests that plants perform best in the geographic area to which they've been adapted over time, that they have kind of a home site advantage. It avoids the risks of introducing new species or genotypes that could harm our remnant plant populations. And it may also provide the best chance for reestablishing and maintaining the numerous and complex relationships among plant species and the relationships they have with other trophic levels. However, if a restoration site is highly altered or degraded, that local adaptation may not provide the best match anymore. An extension of the local is best paradigm is using geographical rules of thumb. They expand the definition of local to different geographic ranges. One caution to this approach is that geographic distance does not always correlate well with ecological distance. So it's important to consider the habitat conditions in the different sources. So here are a few examples of how the geographic rules of thumb can be applied. The NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, advises against moving seed of warm season grass cultivars more than 300 miles north or 200 miles south of their origin. The Nachusa grasslands in Illinois sources seed from within 50 miles of their reconstruction sites, adhering to this local is best paradigm while obtaining adequate quantities of seed, limiting risk to those remnant populations and minimizing their travel time. So there's some practical considerations. Neil Smith sources seed from remnants within 38 counties in southern Iowa to use that local is best as their foundational paradigm, and also match climate and soils between source populations and the site. So those are some ways that geographic rules of thumb are applied. Another approach that's used by the Iowa Department of Transportation, for example, is a source ID seed preference. This provides a preference system within their annual seed bids for Iowa source identified seed. The source identified seed is identified by a yellow tag that's part of this yellow tag system managed by Iowa Crop Improvement Association, and involves keeping records of the remnant sources of production populations and inspecting production fields for species identification and isolation distances. I think this certification structure is important when you're talking about larger institutional buyers who need to have a way of knowing that the growers are using the sources that they say they are. If you happen to know a grower and trust them and know their methods, you could probably find sources that are like this, that aren't in the system per se, but have been sourced from remnant sources. Finally, seed transfer zones are an approach that defines geographic ranges over which it's considered safe to move seed. In some countries, for example, Germany, government statutes dictate the sourcing of native seed within defined seed transfer zones. And ideally, these zones are based on knowledge of a species' genetic structure and reciprocal planting experiments that determine where each plant population is likely to establish and persist. But in the absence of that species-specific information, which is true for most prairie species, the zones are estimated according to climatic variables and ecoregions. So these are some guidelines that are potentially useful. But practical considerations always also come into play. So, what's your budget for seed? Are the species you need available in the market? Can you find the information on the origin of the seed? If you're sourcing it directly from remnants, how good are your identification skills? Have you got permission to collect seed from a remnant? How many volunteers can you involve in your project, and what training will they need? What's your budget for travel? Will the weather cooperate? How are you going to clean and store all the seed? So there's a lot of other questions that are going to come into play. So at this point, I'll take a break, look in here at a sample of Indian grass seed and see if there are any comments or questions, and get a little sip of water.
Thanks, Laura. There have been quite a bit of kind of side conversations as you've been going along amongst attendees. One question that we have is, how old is the remaining less than 1/10% of tallgrass prairie figure? And is that still accurate? And what is that figure in relation to easements, reconstructed prairies? I think, I'm not sure exactly what they're asking, but that less than 1/10% is in reference to remnant prairies.
Right.
But maybe the question is, how much, do we know how much of reconstructed prairie we have in Iowa? So first, how old is that reference number? Has it changed? And do we have any idea how much reconstruction work we've done? So those are pretty big questions.
They are. They're huge questions, and yeah, I would say that probably that 1/10 of 1% is probably still a pretty fair, rough approximation. I think we still, are identifying some new remnants and getting those protected through easements and other means. Yeah, that's a super good question. I think we also, from the existing remnants that we know, while they may be perceived or maybe protected in terms of their, the site exists still, there are remnants that have deteriorated in condition. And so there are, plant populations that we've lost from those. So whether or not that 1/10 of 1% is still the same as it was when that figure was started getting tossed around, I don't know. As far as the amount of land that we've restored or reconstructed, that 1.5 million acres in CRP is one little hint. You can kind of break that down by practice and see which of those are more diverse and more dependent on natives. So it's not, that's the really high estimate there. Over 50,000 acres of roadsides is another piece of that, and then the larger restoration or reconstruction projects like Neil Smith, I think would add on to that. Yeah, that's a super interesting question. Now I want to start doing a back of the envelope calculation and figure it out, but maybe that's another one for continuing discussion.
Yes, and it looks like there's a comment that's, people are chattering about this, but there are several thousand acres in the Les Hills and Grand River grassland. Natives may not be within the listed percentage. Yeah, so there's still a lot of things that we don't know and remnants that we don't know about, but likely they're not huge in size. So I don't think it's gonna fluctuate that number a whole lot. So yeah, and then thinking about all the public land that the state manages and that the county manages. So a lot of things to consider. So
yeah.
that's all we've got in the queue.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I can't wait. I don't know if there's any way to preserve the chat for the future. I don't know if that stays around in the recording. I'd like to see that. Okay. So I'm going to move on ahead because the talk is not about how we do things now, although I thought it was important to kind of set that up and think about that. But the talk's really about the elephant in the room, which is how we should be sourcing seeds in the era of a climate change. And this is the part that really scares me. It really is that, well, okay, I chose a mammoth for this to illustrate that it's the elephant in the room of climate change. You know, I think awareness of this issue has jumped even in the broader population. I just was looking at the Des Moines Register a couple days ago. They were publishing results of the Iowa Farm and Rural Life poll, and 81% of farmers now say that climate change is occurring. And about half of them are concerned about its impact on their operations. And I get seed industry publications, and crop breeders are all over this. They're trying to get a jump on climate change. And so we need to be thinking about it too. And changing how we do things is risky, yeah. But I think we are nearing the point where not changing might be even riskier. So let's look at kind of what the context is and what's already happening in our state. And I want to point out that this is not a map of climate projections for the future. This shows how much, it's actually an old map, really. It's almost a decade old. It shows how much the average temperature over the range from 1991 to 2012 had increased compared to the temperature over the first 6 decades of the 20th century. This, of course, temperature has effects on plant growth, and so this is not lost on the folks who determine the plant hardiness zones at the USDA. And the trend toward rising temperatures, especially at night, and lengthening of the growing season is shifting plant hardiness zones northward. So on the left is the change that already occurred when the map was redrawn based on increased 30-year average temperatures from 81 to 2010, compared with a period from 1971 to 2000. So climate data is aggregated over these 30-year timeframes. But think about that. That's from the the period that started in 1981 compared to the period that started in 1971. So that's basically a 10-year span. And in that time, my garden in Cedar Falls, Iowa got bumped into zone 5A from zone 4B. And on the right is a projection then out to a further 30 years since this map was published. We know that temperature doesn't change in isolation from other climatic factors, and this is once again an observed map of observed change in precipitation, which shows that precipitation has increased in Iowa, but I think more importantly, precipitation patterns are changing. West of us, droughts have intensified, and here we're already seeing increased frequency of very heavy precipitation events. The seasonal patterns of precipitation may be also shifting. And I've heard talk from some of our native seed growers where they're re-examining the timing of seeding and transplanting for their production fields to take into account changing seasonal patterns of precipitation. You may have seen a map like this before, which shows kind of in effect how states' position in the climatic reality shifts over time based on different climate projections. And when I look at the position of Illinois on this map, I start wondering, where is Iowa going to be over the next 30, 40 years, or by the end of the next century? Is Iowa going to be shifting towards a climate that's more like that of Missouri or Kansas? Hey, maybe I don't need my ruby slippers after all to get back home to Kansas. I'm trying to make light of climate change. It's hard. So what's a prairie plant to do in this context? How will plants respond to these changes? We know that many prairie plants have toughness and plasticity. They've adjusted to whatever Iowa seasons have thrown at them up to this point, but how far can they be pushed? How many different stressors can they respond to at once? And then thinking maybe longer term, do they have sufficient genetic diversity to be able to adapt through natural selection to whatever changes are coming? As you shift to the right in this little graphic, as fragmented as our remnants are, do any of our native species have the capacity and connectivity to allow them to migrate rapidly enough to track the changes that will occur? So there's some kind of tantalizing information from a study in Wisconsin. The maps here show 78 different native species. The leftmost graphic represents how the center of abundance of each species has shifted since the 1950s. The center map shows the direction and magnitude of climatic change that's relevant to the habitat of these plants. So if you look at the little compass rows next to each of those diagrams, you can see that the direction of migration for most species corresponds pretty well to the direction of climate change with some variation. But the map on the right shows how much the plant's movement lags behind the pace of change. This is a bit concerning. So what can and should we do as the risks of doing nothing start to accumulate? Is business as usual, as I described it earlier, is it still the right approach? And for plant communities and the ecosystems they support to survive into the future, they're going to have to be resilient. And resilience boils down to diversity and redundancy. You think about a baseball team. How many different positions are there? What's terrible is that when I use sports analogies, I'm always out of my depth because I would have to really work hard to come up with the answers to these questions. So I'll just ask the questions. How many players with different skill sets does it take just to cover all of the positions for one inning, not to mention a game? How many players do you need in the dugout? Should all of your pitchers be right-handed? Besides the players, how many supporting staff does it take to run the team, to organize a game or a season? Diversity and redundancy build resilience in a team and in a prairie. We also need to seek more information as it is created. Iowa is not alone in facing these questions. We can learn from what's being done in other states and other countries. For example, the Society for Ecological Restoration recently released the first international standards for seed-based restoration. Many of those standards can be applied here. What's the ultimate source of the diversity needed for resilient prairies? Well, the remnants we keep talking about. First and foremost, we must do what we can to protect remnants, not just from outright destruction, but from the gradual deterioration through that list of stressors I mentioned before. We can't afford to lose the genetic resources held within these plant populations, nor what they can still teach us about the biotic relationships in mostly intact systems. And me personally, I wouldn't want to live in a world without them. I think they're essential to being a complete human being. And because we don't know which genotypes will be important in the future or whether they're going to persist in the wild under changing conditions, we must preserve as many of them as we can, which means that we mustn't just protect the remnants themselves, but we need to bank seed from remnants and carefully record key information about the site and the plant community that seed came from. We need the capacity to store remnant seed and to grow it out periodically in a way that preserves the genetic identity of the original remnant population. This is not something that we have the capacity to do at the Tallgrass Prairie Center. We have the freezers that you see there for our, these are our deep freezes for preserving our remnant collections. And you can see a little peek inside one of the shelves there that shows these tiny little vials that preserve seed of plants from a variety of remnant populations. So we can't do this alone. This is going to require partnerships and specialized facilities and kind of an overall organization. The Bureau of Land Management Seeds of Success program could act as a model for us, but our seed supply chain and our restoration environment here is very different from that in the Western states where that operates. And so finding funding for this and finding a way of organizing is going to be a very different kind of an animal. We also need to design for resilience with diversity and redundancy in our planted prairies at multiple levels. The seed sources we use should maximize genetic diversity within our defined geographic region. We should continue carrying out research and developing our methods for establishing and maintaining species diversity in planted prairies and establishing large populations that help to maintain diversity within them. Each functional group, each species should have depth on the bench. Monitoring of planted prairies and sharing of the results from those could lead to improvements in our practices. The Prairie Reconstruction Initiative of the Fish and Wildlife Service sets out to do just that. And as the quote from Larry Stone at the beginning said, every remnant and planted prairie in our state is a living laboratory, and really we need to make use of that as a resource. We also need to support a healthy, diverse, and competitive native seed market in our state to meet the need for diverse regionally adapted seed without stressing remnant populations. Seed growers should use methods to avoid unintended selection in seed production, thereby preserving within species diversity. And seed consumers should know what to ask to identify growers who meet those high standards for maintaining diversity. And finally, we may need to, well, not quite finally, but almost finally, we may need to adjust our seed sourcing rules of thumb. We may need to start considering the climate predictions for 10 to 20 years from now, those near range climate predictions, which tend to be fairly accurate. It might be reasonable to source seed for some species from areas that have a current climate that is similar to future projections for the restoration site. Some organizations are already preferencing seed from populations in the southern part of their typical source range to create plantings with a better chance of being sort of pre-adapted for the conditions predicted to occur within the next 10 to 20 years, or that may already be occurring. A more radical action to take, but one that may be necessary for some species, is to purposely shift populations or species into new habitats that provide the conditions these plants need currently or may need in the near future. There may not be as urgent a need to consider this in the tallgrass prairie region, where most of our foundational species have a wide natural range and our landscape is only recently fragmented. We're not like in little alpine meadows in the mountains. However, there may be some species even here which will decline or go extinct without this kind of intervention. And so I think we need a cautious approach to this. It should be driven by information. And we need that information from monitoring of populations, from a deep understanding of the species biology and our remnant prairie systems, such as that provided by many of the folks in this group, and also experimental tests and reliable and fine-scale modeling of current and future habitats. So finally, some of these suggestions I've shared should really encourage us, because I think we're already doing some of the good work that we need to do in protecting remnant prairies and learning to construct more diverse planted prairies that are more resilient and long-lasting. But to protect and restore prairies into the future, we need to start thinking now about how to adapt our practices to climate change. I have more questions than answers, but I think I've provided some broad stroke suggestions here, and I'd really like to know what you think as well. I've provided some contact information. There's laura.walter@uni.edu is my email, so I encourage a conversation on these issues. I don't expect that everybody's going to agree with the things that I laid out in here. And I'd love to see the conversation continue because it's going to affect not just my work, but the system that I really hold dear. And finally, the photos in this, unless it was marked on the slide, are my own or those of my colleagues here at the Tallgrass Prairie Center. And then for more information, these are some of the resources that I consulted. And there's also a link to the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative, which is very interesting. And hope that helps you find more info. And with that, I guess I think we're good, but let's continue the conversation if we have time.
Yeah, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes. And one question that we have is, does the Tallgrass Prairie Center have a list of remnant prairies where they are obtaining the native seed for your seed bank?
Yes, we maintain a record of the sites from which we have collected seed in the past. And as we make future collections, we'll add into that database. So yeah, we maintain that.
Okay, there is a question about climate change, but I see that there's one kind of related similar to what we just discussed. How long can prairie seed be stored? And how long will prairie seed stay viable once planted if they don't germinate because conditions may not be right?
Oh, wow, those are wonderful. So the storage question is, it doesn't have a simple answer. There are many species that we've had in our seed bank, both in our production seed bank, which is stored kind of cool and dry, and in our reserve freezers that are at minus 20 degrees. We have some species that, I'll pull seed out of there when we're low on it and grow that out and have good germination with seed that's 20 or more years old. But there are others that seem to decline more rapidly when they're stored in a seed bank situation. For instance, some of the smaller seeded species like the gentians seem to decline pretty rapidly. And some of our wetland sedges like Carrick stricta, the tussock sedge, loses viability fairly rapidly in dry, cold storage. But then there are other things like the dominant warm season grasses, which you can have 10, 20-year-old seed that still comes up very well. The second part of that question was, remind me, Sarah.
Let's see. So they're planted out on the landscape. How long are they viable if they don't germinate because the conditions may not be right?
Okay, I think that's going to vary a whole lot by species as well. And I don't have a simple answer to that, but there's probably literature on how long these species persist in the natural seed bank. But once they're out there in the environment, they're also subject to things like seed predation. So there are a lot of critters, including earthworms and little small mammals and birds and insects that will feast upon that little packet of wonderful nutrition and eat it. So it's a question of both that seed bank persistence as well as whether or not they get eaten.
Great, thank you. Do we think that genetics can get us through kind of moving forward, or do you think there's potentially a way to avoid only purposely moving species north from the south? There's a lot of kind of open-ended questions, and I think discussion questions going on in the chat that are, I think, just kind of being thought-provoking. But if you have any thoughts about that specifically.
Yeah, I don't know if it's an either or thing. I think that the preservation of genetic diversity in both the existing remnants and its propagation through our seed sourcing system, I think those are of fundamental importance, because those are the raw material for adaptation. And without them, I don't think we stand much of a chance. But as far as that assisted migration piece and purposely moving things in the direction of expected climate change, to me, it seems like that would be more of a species-specific decision, where you're looking at species that are, rare, maybe at the edge of their range, or restricted to certain, particular microhabitats that are threatened by the changes that are occurring. But yeah, this is the kind of thing I was hoping that I could stimulate this kind of discussion, even though I don't have the answers, and I still, I tell you, I don't consider myself the expert on this topic.
Well, Laura, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. I'm kind of selfish in the fact that I really just wanted to have this conversation, and I just kind of wanted to throw this topic out there just to get people thinking about it, because, you know, climate change is inevitable. So lots of good conversations going on. I'm sure there will be more information for the future. Okay, so Marlene is a co-founder and executive director of the Iowa Wildlife Center, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to offering professional wildlife rehabilitation, conservation education, and wildlife assistance skills training services in Central Iowa and beyond. So the Iowa Wildlife Center was a recipient of our silent auction funds and other donations last year in 2019 at our in-person Iowa Prairie Network winter meeting. And so she thought it would be nice to highlight how those funds have been used and the restoration work that has gone on at the center. So go ahead and share your screen.
All right, well, we're just really happy to be here. Trust me, when I see so many of you at the next in-person meeting, there will be many, many hugs, because I'm certainly missing those from so many of you. So we're really thrilled to be here today to give you this little update, and we're going to kind of blaze through this because it's, I mean, after the programs of the morning, and I know we're going to have another one to look forward to after this. It's been wonderful. So I want to thank the speakers for sharing their expertise and knowledge with us. So just to give everyone a background on who we are, most of you know who we are, but in a nutshell, our mission is to provide professional wildlife rehabilitation to native Iowa species, to provide wildlife assistance skills training, and to provide public education about wildlife and habitat, including stewardship and protection. When we thought about what species we were going to take in, because wildlife rehabilitators have a tendency to take everything or take too many of one species. And so I'm really cognizant of that fact. And so in the very beginning, I knew we had to limit ourselves as far as numbers and species. It's hard for me, a generalist, to do, but also as a wildlife biologist, I know that with a network of wildlife biologists and ecologists, I know that we have a certain expertise to bring to this profession that others don't. So we looked at birds and decided all species of birds. We looked at reptiles, and people don't like to do reptiles or amphibians. And so I said, yes, we'll do all species of reptiles. And then as far as mammals, that's where we were going to limit this to those species of greatest conservation need. That doesn't mean we won't take more common species. It depends on our capacity. So, so that means how much funding we have, how many volunteers or staff we have to care for these animals, what our facilities are currently. We've been able to take in species such as a bobcat kitten for a month to rear before I could transfer it on. Raised a badger pup this last summer. We've taken in coyotes and fox and things like that. So mammals and bats definitely are one of our focus groups. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we do, what species we take in. So you can see here it's a conceptual site design for part of Wildway, and you'll see maps of it in a minute. The blue circle, that little arched building, is the first building that we put up. That's our 40 by 100 steel arch building. That's our future maintenance and storage building, which we have filled with stuff, but we've also been able to do rehabilitation out of that building, including the 140 bats or so we took care of over the summertime, this last summer. And this circled area back here shows the site where we're also currently focusing on, and those are our pre-release enclosure area. That's our pre-release enclosure area. And then this will be, when we can in the future, will be our clinic and education center. And this is an example of some of the enclosures that we're building out there. This is specifically designed for bats and getting them back up to release capacity with strength and muscles and such, and teaching bat pups then how the nuances of flight and capturing insects. It's all specifically laid out as far as size and materials used. And you can see that there's another one in the background. We erected 4 of these this fall, late summer and early fall, and we got 2 of them completed to be able to put bats in before we released them. That's another whole program in and of itself, but before we released them in early October. And there you can see that some of the little sky puppies, these are big brown bats, forming their own little mini colony in this pre-release enclosure. So here's an aerial of Wildway. That's the name of the land that we own in Boone County. And just to give you perspective, the Des Moines River is up in the upper left. Ledges Park entrance is in your upper right. Ledges State Park is that area. Boone Wildlife Research Station is here. So if you drive straight south of the Ledges Park entrance, you will run into Wildway, but don't do that. So take the curve of the road, and our preferred route to get in here is through the gate. That's your current entry into Wildway. And it is protected by a conservation easement with Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, which helps me sleep better at night, quite honestly, because we just never know what's going to happen. And the habitat itself, adding to Iowa's habitat, was really important for me. It's not simply a matter of taking care of individual animals. It's also taking care of the habitats that these animals rely upon. So yay, INHF once again. And I want to put a shout out here. If we were meeting in person, this family would be in the audience, and I'd get to hug these little girls who aren't little anymore. But here's a couple little girls who came one year to cut and fold paper towels for bat care when we were in dire need of extra help. And they've grown into big girls who created a flower business, and they donated 30% of their profits to charity. And Iowa Wildlife Center was one of the recipients. So Amelia and Vivian Todd, big virtual hug out to you two, and to their dad and mom, who are also awesome people. So stewarding Wildway certainly takes a village. We just can't, these old geezers sitting before you can't do it ourselves. Certainly it's not our role to do it ourselves. This is not our land. This is the Iowa Wildlife Center's land, and we want to make sure it is there for the community to help with, but also to use in many ways. And so here you see Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation staff and interns working with some of our volunteers one day, getting some perspective for the interns, what Iowa Natural Heritage does on the landscape, helping get them trained with tool use and things. And I've always loved INHF's interaction with us, of course, because I worked there for over a decade. Stewarding Wildway takes, as everybody knows, takes a variety of methods to do it well and to do it properly, and it is hard work, but we do use prescribed fire to help invigorate the native vegetation, and we've also removed over 30,000. 300. Sorry, Bruce can correct me with numbers. Over 300,000 invasive shrubs and trees. And you might wonder where that number came up with, because this guy counts and lists things. So he's a number guy, and so that's where that number comes from. And I don't doubt him for a minute, because I know what he's like. But we've had other people helping us over the years too. We incorporated in 2010. So here's an older crew, previous crew of the Conservation Corps Iowa. And there's some people here that are still involved with Iowa Wildlife Center, and with many of you, I think. And so here's DeWitt Boyd, who's now the Iowa Program Manager for Conservation Corps Iowa and Minnesota. But here down in the lower right is Andrew Montgomery, who was on the team back then, but who is now working for Carl Kurtz. So it's just, and there have been others that have been on the Conservation Corps teams over the years, including Rose Donaher, who's now working for IDOLS and has done great things for in her previous role with the Soil and Water Commission District. And so this is a really, really great resource for young people to get a foothold into conservation in Iowa and out and beyond if they choose to leave, but we want to keep them here. And then of course our hardworking interns and loyal volunteers that tend to stick with us for year after year. So I don't know why, but they find something in it that feeds their souls, I think. And back in 2014, we pulled together some professionals that many of you know and will recognize here, and including Lloyd Krim on your right, and Lauren Lown next to him, Bruce, Tom Rosburg, and one of our neighbors, Doug Pedersen, who has volunteered with us over the years, and Kevin Griggs. The one not pictured is Tim Youngquist, who at the time was the Stewardship Committee chair, and who actually helped me a little bit with this program. So thanks, Tim. So Tim created this for the management plan for Wildway that the stewardship, that resulted in the discussions of the Stewardship Committee. And he actually provided me this slide because I couldn't figure out how to take that off the management plan. But anyway, and you can see here that we've got it zoned, and part of this follows the conservation easement criteria too. And so this area outlined in yellow is bordered by roads on all sides. And so we decided that would be probably always most affected by human traffic or noise or whatever. And so this is the public zone that that we'll save aside for public use. The zone in the pink is what we consider the patient space. This is where those like the bat enclosures are, and where we'll have raptor pre-release enclosures and songbird enclosures. Oh, by the way, we can use those bat enclosures for songbird use. So that's a multifunction of what we like to do to get the most use out of a building. And then in the green, outlined in the green, is what we consider wild space. And so we will never put a building out here. It's not going to be developed. It is for the wild, whether it's for wild animals, whether it's to release wild animals, whether it's to get some solace for the human volunteers and staff after a hard day's work, but it will never see any development on it. Within this, you can see this was a highly used human property on the landscape for over 100 years. And when we bought it, it had been part of an organic farm. So it was in cool season pasture. Much of it was in cool season pasture. And you can see this is what we've been focusing on in reconstructing wetland, because it was cool season pasture when we bought it. So this area right here is the area that we did seed to Prairie a couple of years ago. And this area, the big public zone, we will be seeding. It's under, these areas have been under corn soybean rotation for management to get them prepared to seed to Prairie. And we will be seeding that here in another fall.
This fall.
Oh, this fall already? I don't know if that's going to happen, but we'll see. Anyway, that's the plan. So, and you can see here is what is a CRP wetland. So there's some good plants in there. But this is the area that you all are interested in. This is our woodland savanna area. And over the years, we've been working along this edge and on encroaching invasive species. And this area has been now this year and last year the site of a lot of physical work, and you contributed to that. So this is that little prairie area that I mentioned. INHF actually provided about $2,600 to purchase the seed. It was part of a larger NIFWIF grant, I think for pollinators, but we were able to buy. There's Carl back there, Carl Kurtz, and Bruce is helping spread the mix of Carl Kurtz and Jon Judson seed that went onto this site. And then in 2019, this was the first season's growth. And here, Andrew Montgomery, that young man I pointed out from an earlier AmeriCorps or Conservation Corps team, is helping Bruce identify some that were popping up in the prairie, and that's Andrew's dad, George. So in 2020, a lot of us experienced a pretty substantial drought, but there's always cause for excitement out in nature, I think. And so indeed, whether it was spotting this lazy Liatris, and I'm wondering, Tom, if maybe it actually is evolving this method of avoiding deer browse. I don't know, just laying over. I have no idea, but that might be something that you research someday. And otherwise, we still, some of our volunteers still bring their young children out, and so they're, you know, looking for spider webs and nuts and learning trees, and so it's a great place to spend time in the middle of a pandemic. And here's just a snapshot of one of the two small CRP wetlands that predated IWC ownership. So we've of course assumed the responsibility of managing them as well. So the first phase of the Savanna restoration project for Iowa Wildlife Center's Wildway was just to select some elder oaks that are scattered throughout the property and rescue them. And so again, this is one of the earlier Conservation Corps Iowa teams that have done just that, removed all of the understory trees growing up and rescued this large oak here. And that happened throughout the site. And I'm gonna step aside or roll aside and let Bruce talk about this part, because this is what he's been most intimately involved with them.
Yeah, so the biggest step, or at least a really important step, of getting rid of all of the understory, all of the honeysuckle, autumn olive, and moldiflora rose, which I probably helped plant, or at least I was helping plant back in the 1970s and early 80s. So it's come full circle. The Conservation Commission and DNR used to promote the planting of these particular species, and now they've overrun the landscape. So we're removing them. Like Marlene said, at least 300,000 of these invasives have been removed. I've been working on it since I retired about 3 years ago, and then of course Conservation Corps of Iowa has been working on it as well. So that's what it looked a little bit like beforehand. And then once the Conservation Corps started helping us, it started to make headways relatively quickly. And this is what it looks like under this oak once we removed about, I don't know, 8 or 10 feet high vegetation underneath. And I'm specifically spending a lot of time leaving the native vegetation. So hand treating each stem with Pathfinder. And that seems to be working real well. I've discovered something too. I've been treating it right through the winter, and I actually have better kill rate treating the shrubbery that I'm cutting off in the wintertime than I do, say, in July, with the same amount of chemical. So this is the point at which we started using the Iowa Prairie Network funding for removing these invasive, primarily ironwood. I learned a heck of a lot about ironwood in the last couple of years. Initially, we left most of the ironwood, and then we realized that they really have to be removed, especially under the tree canopies. Under any of these large oaks, we remove all of the ironwoods that go to the tip of the canopy or the shade area. And we're removing some other non-savanna trees as well, but I'm not a purist for savanna. I kind of disagree with what really is a savanna tree. I think even honey locust could be considered a savanna tree. So the main thing is we're trying to rescue the oaks and the hickories. And then if there's something like a honey locust or a native mulberry that happens to be in there and isn't encroaching on some of the oaks and hickories, we're leaving them stand too. But I would say that the Conservation Corps of Iowa crew removed at least 400 or 500 ironwoods and some of the other trees during the 3 or 4 days that funding helped with. Again, this is just kind of a look at what it looks like now after removal of the understory and the ironwoods. We still have a lot of work to do. We primarily worked up on the bench, on the flatter area, which is probably maybe 10 or 15 acres total and we have about a third of that remaining to clear out the ironwoods primarily. Most of the understory with the honeysuckle, multiflora rose, and autumn olive has been removed. So this is a better look. This is after the Conservation Corps of Iowa went through and did their Savanna restoration work. It's really looking much better. We're excited to see what's going to happen. We'll probably try to burn as much as we can in the fall. This is the only prairie, or only sizable prairie remnant that's left on Wildway. And it's actually a burial site for James Gildea, which was the original family farm, or the family settlers that were on this area. And he was buried in 1859. And there are probably 30 or 40 prairie species that we can identify on this site right now. There may be more. We'll find out. It'll burning in that same area this fall in October, maybe into early November, and we'll see what comes up. So one of the positive things, or one of the things I would advise anybody to do, well, first of all, the main goal of wildlife management, we're trying to increase the genetic diversity, keeping local ecotype. Any of the seed we put down, as Marlene has alluded to, we're using native seed as much as possible. I've actually hand harvested quite a bit of native prairie seed in the past. That's ending up here as well. But the 3 bioblitzes that happened in 2007, 2008, 2010 really helped us get an idea of what animals and plants that existed at this site before we really started some of the management. So we've identified 342 species of plants. About half of those are prairie and savanna species. Tom Rosburg, Deb Lewis, and a host of other people helped on the bioblitzes. So it's a pretty accurate and extensive list. We have 203 species of birds, 25 species of mammals, 6 reptiles, 9 amphibians. We have all of the frogs and the one toad that can be found in central Iowa occur on Wildway. 29 dragonfly species have been discovered around the pond areas and the wetland areas, and at least 2 or 3 of those are new county records during the bioblitz. Lots of different butterflies. I'm kind of proud that I've identified 7 bumblebee species. We're still looking for the rusty patch. I'm pretty confident it's got to be there because there have been several records along the Des Moines River, but lots of diversity. So this is just a breakdown of where we spent the money that the Iowa Prairie Network gave to the Iowa Wildlife Center. Chemicals are not cheap. That was a significant portion of it, but we did get an extra day from the Conservation Corps that they threw in because they really enjoy working out at Wildway and do a great job. So thanks very much to Iowa Prairie Network for all that you've done to make sure that we keep going.
Thank you all so much.
Great, thank you guys. We do have just a couple questions. How many acres is the Savanna restoration?
I think about 35 acres.
Okay.
There's one little piece of Savanna that Marlene didn't mention. It's more on the eastern side at the end of that, what will be a prairie restoration. There's probably several acres in that, and that's already been worked on too. But the bigger chunk is kind of a cohesive unit of 35 acres.
Great, thank you. And lastly, is the Savanna area also open to the public, or is public access restricted to that prairie area along the eastern boundary on Peach Avenue?
Okay, that's a really good question. And so for the sake of our wild patients, the Savanna will not be open to the public on a daily basis, but we are prone to having lots of public events and have since we started. So we're saving that wild area for those special events, and so there are plans then, of course, to get people back there on with guided trips, and we will have we'll keep trails open and things like that. So it's not something that we're going to close off permanently to the public, but we have to gauge human impact on our wild patients. And so But that smaller woodland savanna area that Bruce mentioned at the end of the public prairie, what will be the public prairie, definitely will be able to, people will be able to access that from the prairie area.
But what if people really want to come and see what's been done there?
Access is available on a case-by-case basis in that regard.
And I'm happy to lead a tour if anyone wants to.
We like to share it. We have classes from Iowa State University and local elementary schools come. So it's not something we're just trying to keep as a hidden gem. We want it to be a shared gem.
There you go.
All right. There are a few other questions coming in. Maybe some of them you can answer yourselves in the chat just to keep these going forward. But one, are you doing any updates about your efforts? Will they be posted on a website or shared publicly?
Theoretically, yes. I would like to clone myself and be more technologically adept. So I can't promise, but absolutely we try and get updates and the word out in as many ways as possible, and as many ways I can sanely continue to do things like that. So that's my answer.
All right. Well, thank you guys very, very much. I certainly hope you find the Rusty Patch Bumblebee. It's got to be there somewhere.
Yes, it does. I will find
I'd
it.
be happy to help with that effort as well. But thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. Up next, we have a talk from Jon Judson. He is a native Iowan that has spent his life working with natural resources. He runs a natural resource consulting and management business called Diversity Farms based near Dedham, Iowa. The primary focus of the business is producing and planting locally native prairie seed. Jon has been a member of the Iowa Prairie Network for more than 20 years. And they've been doing a really neat project down in Des Moines, and I'm fortunate enough to have seen it personally. So I'm excited to hear about it.
I'd like to thank everyone for an opportunity to talk to you today. I mean, it's always a pleasure for me to get together with this group, albeit virtually this time. I've had an opportunity to spend a lot of time with prairie folks around the state of Iowa, several of which I've talked some about this particular project, but most have not seen it. Sarah is one of the fortunate people that's had an opportunity to see both the work we did at the ground level of the Crouse Gateway Center as well as the rooftop. So as I talk to this group, I commonly think of a quote that inspires me from Aldo Leopold, where Aldo says, "Our biases are indeed a sensitive index to our loyalties, our generosities, and our manner of wasting weekends." So thank you for sharing and wasting part of your weekend with us here at the Iowa Prairie Network. It's always a pleasure to spend time with people with similar biases and those of you with similar visions as the rest of us, and that enjoy the natural resources of our state of Iowa. With that, I'd like to thank hold on just a second. Just bear with me, here we are. Okay. All right, just I would like to take this opportunity to thank Kyle and Sharon Krause for their vision and their continued support of conservation and the environment. I think you'll find that this project is rather unique compared to most of the types of projects we talk about when we're talking about prairie. This particular project, the Crouse Gateway Center, is home to the Krause Group, which is a variety of different businesses owned by the Krause family, and among other ventures, most prominent to most of us across the state is they're the owners of come and go convenience stores. So we see those commonly. They are longtime Iowans and have a considerable conservation ethic that we've had an opportunity to work with them on other projects as well here at Diversity Farms. We did some work on a nice prairie reconstruction on their home farm, as well as we did some prairie work for Sharon on her sheep ranch, which is called Dalaterra. So the project over the actually began in 2017, where we were contacted. Diversity Farms was contacted to and asked to participate in a large native landscaping project on the Krause Gateway Center. We essentially at that point elicited some expertise to help us design a palette of species that we felt were appropriate for this native landscaping, typically species that are shorter, drier, showier, but really quite diverse overall. There was today I'm going to talk mainly about the work that we did on the rooftop, but we also did several native landscaping beds at the ground level. In fact, about 13,000 plants were planted at the ground level, and those are open for public viewing at any time. As you'll notice, they have quite a public space around the Krause Gateway Center, and it's right across from Papa John's Sculpture Park in downtown Des Moines. So if you happen to be downtown Des Moines, you want to take a stroll, you can walk through and take a look at the prairie beds that we created there. But today I want to kind of talk a little more specifically about some of the plantings we did at the rooftop. Really quite a unique opportunity, and all native species. There was no other species that were brought into this. We had used over 60 native species on the rooftop. It was actually kind of designed as in 3 or 4 zones, kind of a shorter, medium, and tall. But the species that we used, none were really tall species. So it was kind of zoned as tall, but the tallest of those species was like rough blazing star. So we used 60-some native species. We kind of arranged them by what we classified as short, medium, and tall. I had an opportunity, my daughter and one of her friends took a tour of the rooftop, and her friend Taylor coined the phrase "prairie in the sky," and so that's where our name for this prairie had come from, was directly from her, and it seems quite appropriate. We started out the process once we kind of had a design in place, kind of a palette of species that we wanted to use. We began, and all of these plants were started in our greenhouse from seed. We started the first seed stratification in November and December of 2017. The first seed is essentially sowed, say, January of 2018. So everything was started as seedlings. We grow in these container pots. Most of those plants were transplanted from the trays that you see directly into these containers. We spent the next several months transplanting and caring for the young seedlings. And it was then, it was now mid-August when the construction was complete enough for us to go in and actually take plants to the site and start the planting process. we essentially formulated a plan to deliver 17,000 plants, which was essentially 2 of these long trailers completely full of plants. We delivered those to the site, and as part of the construction phase, they had a crane on site. So these plants were loaded into the metal racks that you can see here and delivered to the rooftop. Over the next 2 days, a large crew was assembled to distribute and lay out the plants and put them in the ground. It was a effort by several entities associated with the Gateway project, including Wood Roofing, the Confluence Landscape Architect Group, Diversity Farms, and the Ryan Company, who was the primary builders and overseers of the entire project. So you can see here, this is what it looked like shortly after the area was planted. The plants that we were put in is essentially were all seedlings that were spaced, roughly 1 foot to 1.5 foot apart. So at this point, things still look pretty bare. But as you'll see in some of the upcoming slides and some of the photos, things will continue to fill in over the next couple of years. We spent about 2 days putting all the plants in the ground. It was quite rigorous. At times there was at least 20 people in the process of laying stuff out and getting them planted. After they were planted, the whole site was irrigated. The rooftop is set up with both above ground and below ground irrigation. Maybe at this time I'll talk a little bit about, because I'm sure some of you are wondering about the soil medium that we planted into, as well as the depth and those kinds of things. So the soil medium is actually manufactured soil. So they didn't take regular ground soil, they manufactured soil from both organic and inorganic materials. It's designed to only hold a certain amount of moisture before the excess water runs away. So it doesn't ever get really soggy and boggy. It stays fairly dry. And so we, in the process of selecting the plants that we wanted to put up there, we looked for plants that are tolerant to that. So we picked out most species are what we'd consider dry or dry mesic species that we planted up there. And again, nothing that was really very tall. So we did not plant, say, big blue stem and rigid goldenrod and tall species like that. Most of it was shorter stuff. We had, gray goldenrod and penstemons and echinacea and spider, prairie spiderwort species like that. Things that are shorter and showier and more adapt to these kinds of conditions. We certainly had concerns in that the soil depth is only 6 inches to 8 inches in depth. Most of us consider prairie plants deep rooted. But then in the process of me kind of thinking through this, we see that we have prairie in other areas where we have shallow soils overlaying rock, say in the Flint Hills of Kansas, or even in the goat prairies of northeast Iowa and southwest Wisconsin. We see relatively shallow soils that have prairie plants on them. So rather than the plant's roots going straight down, they go down and have an opportunity to branch out. So, like I said, we had some concerns too, in that we were planting in August, that we would have challenges with getting plants rooted down in time, and questioned how good a survival we would have going into the next spring. But as you can see in this photo of May 2019, which is essentially shortly after the planting in August of 2018, as far as the number of growing days, we had really good overall survival and plants that were established fairly well. As you can see in the foreground here, we have alum root, the kind of the long stalk you sticking up, and prairie smoke, both blooming that very next season. You can see that some of the sedges of the sedges that we planted there are doing quite well, as well as species like June grass. So this was the same season on a different part of the roof. You can see up there, they've made this accessible to their employees. And you can see that they also have benches out there. So employees have an opportunity to come up here. They can walk through the prairie on the roof. They have benches where they can sit and look out across the landscape of the downtown. Here's another photo that a little bit later that next year, you can see in yellow there, Missouri evening primrose blooming. In a variety of, like I said, a lot of the earlier season stuff is coming on and getting quite big, even by the middle of May of the second growing season. Here we move in just a little bit later into the June of 2019. And you can see in the foreground, there's some prairie spiderwort blooming, foxglove beard's tongue, and you can see a variety of other little bit more warm season plants starting to get more growth. Here we are with some early bloomers, and on the left photo is Penstemon cobia, or showy penstemon. You can see the June grass plant behind it is already heading out. So even into that second growing season, we're getting considerable growth on the plants. If you recall how bare it looked, even at the beginning of the spring, things have begun to fill out much more just a month or two into the next growing season. And then by the fall of 2019, we're starting to get considerable growth on most of the plants. The goldenrod you're seeing here is gray goldenrod or oldfield goldenrod, Solidago nemoralis, which come up in the very first season, been quite showy. And then by winter time, you can see that we have kind of a really pretty hue of browns and golds laid over a little bit of snow, which is quite an unusual view from 6 stories up. And by the next spring, in May of this last year, you can see that things are really progressing nicely. We've got, really nice, beautiful plants of prairie smoke blooming, prairie phlox, bracted or prairie spiderwort, heartleaf golden Alexander. Things are really looking quite beautiful. It's the prairie's second spring. A little bit more close-ups of some of the phlox. You can see this phlox on the left is actually kind of some of the genetics from some local phlox that we've grown that actually is more white than it is pink. So we'll have a combination of both those and some kind of more normally pink-looking phlox. A few more shots here of what it looked like last spring or last summer early. And by summer, we were getting, allium blooming and spotted bee balms. It was really interesting in that we saw, even though it's 6 stories up, the insects we're still finding it. So we're finding bumblebees and honeybees and butterflies, even 6 stories in the air. So you can see that it's really progressed as we went into last summer. It's quite showy. Unfortunately, most of the employees were not in the Krause Gateway Center this year due to the COVID pandemic. But hopefully when they have an opportunity to return in the near future, they'll be wowed by what we're seeing with this prairie in the sky. Okay, and so, and then again, by later in the fall, you know, we have some really spectacular views from the rooftop of solidago blooming and seed pods of foxglove penstemon. The asters and little blue stem in this photo on the left are quite spectacular. And of course, the goldenrod stayed showy through most of the fall. Here's a little later in the fall when stuff started to die down, but still some really beautiful colors of browns and rusts and auburns. So again, I'd like to take an opportunity to thank Sharon and Kyle Krause for their vision and their continued support for conservation. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank others that have helped me on this project. My daughter, Savanna, my friend, Laura Lake, and my greenhouse manager, Caitlin Schultes, and her 2 sisters, Maddie and Peyton, for their continued efforts on help and management of this project.
Great. Thank you, Jon.
So with that, take any questions that any of you might have.
Yeah. As I warned you several months ago, there are lots of questions. So first off, where did the soil come from and what is in the soil profile? You might have mentioned this, but it might be good to reiterate.
Well, and that part I can't give you 100% specifics on. It's actually a manufactured soil, so it's some inorganic matter. In fact, if you go up and feel the soil, it actually feels fairly granular, sandy, actually bigger particles of sand, and then organic material, which is probably some form of peat. And so it's a manufactured soil, and I don't know exactly the concentration of each of those things, but it doesn't feel like our typical soils, but it has very good draining qualities as well as organic matter there to hold moisture. So the one thing I didn't talk about that there may be questions about is irrigation. I did mention that it had both above ground and below ground irrigation. The above ground irrigation has since been removed, and we just have below ground irrigation now. It was designed to not take very much moisture and not take very much rain. The very first season when we planted in August, we watered once and then had regular enough rainfall that we didn't have to water again through the entire season. But this last year, when we were so dry in July and August, we had to increase the irrigation some. So I'm down there on a pretty regular basis, keeping track of that. And so over the first few years, we've gotten a better idea. And so to give you some perspective, in general, in the hot part of the summer, we irrigate about 3 times a week, but at about 1/10 of an inch each time. So it's really only getting about 3/10 of an inch of rain per week, which is maintaining the plants beautifully.
Great. Well, you answered a few questions in that one. So irrigation definitely came up in the chat box. Another question that is being asked is how how will these plants be managed in the future?
Well, certainly, we're not going to be able to burn. You know, I mean, we've had that conversation, but only in jest. So normally what happens is later in the season, a lot of the plant material is being removed. So we don't have all that plant material up there through the whole season. Plus there's some things early on here that we don't want to become overpopulated. The goldenrods and asters have a tendency of producing lots of seed, and a lot of it is viable and coming up the next spring. So we're removing that plant material just about the time it's starting to seed out. With that, there is some more maintenance associated with it up there. We can't let that material just continue to build up over time. And so there is an effort to try to keep that reduced some as we go into the winter.
Great. Was there any consideration of the weight of the soil and moisture on the building structure?
Absolutely, that was all part of the design. They knew from the very beginning that they would be having that. They knew exactly how much weight that was going to be, because all of that stuff had been calculated out, and the design of the building and the structure of the building was all planned out in advance.
Does Diversity Farms source its own seed?
Diversity Farms sources a fair amount of its own seed. There's some species that we don't have here locally that we also used up on the roof. For instance, the Missouri evening primrose you saw blooming there is not one that we have growing here locally, and we only raise kind of locally genetic seed. So I have to source some species from other places.
Thank you. So there's some chat about the amount of soil that is there and whether like freezing is an issue. Is the soil heated at all?
The soil is not heated, and certainly that was one of my early concerns as well, is that since that a hard freeze could potentially have detrimental impact, but we have not seen that through the last 2 growing seasons. We will probably still have some things to learn. There is really no other large-scale roof all prairie project that we know of in the Midwest. So there will be some lessons to be learned. There are some species that we've planted up there that are doing better than others, and we anticipated that. And so as we go in and do replacements, if we have things that are kind of fading out, we'll replace with some things that seem to be doing well.
Okay, yeah, it's always nice to have people willing to experiment with these things. And another big question that has been asked a few times, of course, is how much does something like this cost?
You know, from the construction and phase part of it, I don't have good numbers on that part of it. I mean, I can kind of give you some estimates on, you know, what plant material and some early maintenance might be. I think if someone was really serious about it, they would want to sit down and factor all of those things in including increased structure costs to hold that heavy weight, what the soil materials would cost, what the irrigation, and I wasn't necessarily privy to all of those costs associated with the project. We were essentially brought in to supply plant material, do layout, help put the plants in the ground, and then do follow-up maintenance on it.
All right, I think we have, people seem to be really interested in this topic, so I think I'll ask just a couple more questions. How was the growing medium inoculated? Don't some prairie plants need mycorrhizae?
I don't know that it was inoculated. My guess is possibly some of that may have occurred from the organic material that they used, if they used, a peat type organic matter. I can't say for sure that it wasn't inoculated, but again, I wasn't privy to that information either.
Okay. Sorry, I just had one in my own queue of what I was going to ask next, and I've lost that question. Oh, here it is. What are the dimensions?
The dimensions, I don't know what the actual dimensions are, but there's about, I think 20, a little over 20,000 square feet of area that we put plants in on the roof. So the spacing was like one plant per roughly 1¼ square feet. And some plants were spaced closer and some plants were spaced farther away. A small plant, like a prairie violet, you put in a little closer proximity than if you're putting in a large flowered beard stung or foxglove penstemon or something. Plants that are a little bigger, you space a little farther apart.
Okay, and lastly, and I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, but I think it's kind of a good one to close on. What do you expect the site to look like in 10 years or 40 years? Or do you expect this to gain momentum, this type of work?
Oh, this type of work, we certainly hope so. I mean, the Krause family, their intent of this project was to show their dedication to the state of Iowa and downtown Des Moines. And I think that the people of Des Moines and surrounding areas are gonna look at this project very closely, both from its architectural structure as well as the landscaping and prairie work that they've done. So I'm hoping that it catches on. I mean, you stand up there 6 stories high and you look across at all the rooftops, and there's certainly an opportunity to bring more prairie to downtown Des Moines.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jon, for presenting. And again, I'll just kind of say from my own personal experience, I think what you've done with this project is beautiful. And I have absolutely seen bumblebees foraging at 6 stories and have photographs. And there's also native landscaping on the ground floor that is so public friendly. Just the way they designed it is awesome. So kudos to them and you all. I think, we need native plants wherever we can put them. And with that, you can go ahead and stop sharing your screen now, Jon, and we'll let Michelle kind of give some closing remarks.
All right. Well, thank you all very, very much for being here. Obviously, this was an incredible and amazing event so far. I really enjoyed all of it. I know everyone's probably itching to get off of their seats, which is good. We don't want to be sitting in front of the computer all the time. But I do have a few closing things I'd like to say before you go. I'm going to share my screen here in just a minute. Okay, so I'm on the Iowa Prairie Network homepage here. Just want to remind you that we have an amazing and exciting new conference coming, the Iowa Prairie Conference. That's going to be July 31st and July 31st and August 1st. So put that on your calendars, and more information will be coming up for that as we plan it. And the landing page for that will be on the Iowa Prairie Network website. So this is the Iowa Prairie Network website that I'm on right now. If you come to it, it's just iowaprairienetwork.org. And I'm going to go on here to About Iowa Prairie Network. And down towards the bottom here is the Vincent Bluff Restoration Project. So if you would like to donate towards this restoration work, you would go down beneath this photo here, and this is where you'd go to PayPal, so that it lets us know that your money is intended towards Vincent Bluff's work, or you can send a check to our treasurer's. His address is right here. And then, so this is a photo from the Vincent Bluff the Vincent Bluff Remnant Prairie. It shows right here. It's got a lot of tall grass prairie mix, short grass prairie, or excuse me, not short grass prairie, medium. Yeah, and short on the ridge tops. Anyways, but this is the part that is very concerning. It's about a 40-acre prairie remnant, and what you're seeing here, the vibrant dark green is the Oriental bittersweet, and then a lot of autumn olive, tree of heaven, and of course all of the other invasive four-blight plants that come along with prairie areas. So any money that is going towards this I keep wanting to say restoration. The restoration work to keep this remnant prairie healthy would be going towards trying to push these invasive plants back. I just want you to all know that it takes us all, right? So we all know the plight of the Iowa prairies and a lot more other ecosystems in our world, but today we're just focusing on prairie. Sometimes it feels very depressing and it's very hard to be positive. And I get that way myself. I'm a very emotional person. I have a very strong love and hard connection to prairie. And so with those strong positive feelings, some strong negative feelings can come along as well and really make you feel down in the dumps and like, what can I do? What can we do? The world is going to hell. Sometimes I feel that way as well. The good thing is I usually come back out of it, and that helps drive my work and my passion towards wanting to help and doing things to change. So there's all kinds of things you can do. You can help with advocacy for the political and regulations and law that helps protect prairies. You can advocate and with just your neighbors and friends and get them involved. Get some kids out to a prairie, drag their butts off of the computer, off of the video game, bring them out to a prairie and show them some amazing things. There's all kinds of things you can do. And sometimes I feel it's the whole little many drops fill the bucket analogy. So I changed that to us. This is what I just thought up as we were listening to these great speakers we had. Each single prairie plant makes up the field of beauty, life, and sustenance. So it takes one prairie plant at a time to build a prairie, and one human being doing something to help preserve prairie and spread education can join in this big group that we have here. We had over 100 people here today that actually came. We've had 200 plus people register, and who knows how many households we have. There's multiple people watching. So we can all work together and create a prairie and protect a prairie, right? We're not all alone. We can do it.